Hello and welcome to Nightfall Royals. We drift back to the marble streets of ancient Rome to follow the life of Julius Caesar. From his patrician beginnings to the heights of leadership that would shape the world, his gentle, fact-filled journey blends history and reflection, perfect for unwinding as night settles in. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? I'd love to hear in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where in the world you're joining from. If this story brought you peace or sparked a quiet curiosity, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more calm histories to fall asleep to. Wishing you a restful night under the same stars that once shone over the Roman Forum. In the gentle morning light of a summer day in the year 100 BCE, the cobbled streets of ancient Rome stirred with the quiet rhythms of daily life. It was on the 12th day of Julius, the month that would one day bear his name, that a child was born who would reshape the very foundations of the world. His first breath was drawn into Suburra, a neighborhood where patrician families lived alongside the vibrant energy of Rome's working classes. Gaius Julius Caesar entered the world as the son of Gaius Julius Caesar, the elder, a man of modest political standing but noble lineage. Cata, a woman whose intelligence and strength would profoundly shape her son's character. The Caesar family traced their ancestry to Iulus, the legendary son of Aeneas, connecting young Gaius to the mythic origins of Rome itself. Yet, despite this illustrious heritage, the family's circumstances were comfortable rather than wealthy, grounding the future leader in a world where privilege came with responsibility. The Rome into which Caesar was born was a republic in the truest sense, a complex tapestry of traditions, laws, and competing interests. The city hummed with the voices of senators debating in the forum, merchants haggling in bustling markets, and a steady rhythm of construction as the eternal city continued to grow. Young Gaius would have fallen asleep to these sounds, the lullaby of a civilization at the height of its republican ideals. In the quiet moments of his earliest years, before ambition and destiny called his name, Caesar existed in the simple sphere of childhood wonder. His mother Aurelia was known throughout Rome for her virtue and wisdom. Ancient sources tell us she was deeply involved in her son's upbringing, unusual for a woman of her station, who might typically delegate such duties to nurses and tutors. Instead, she chose to nurture his curious mind herself, recognizing in him a spark that required careful tending. The household where Caesar spent his formative years was one where conversation flowed like wine at evening meals. His father, though not among Rome's most prominent politicians, understood the delicate balance of Roman society. He would have shared with his young son the stories of their ancestors, the values that had built their civilization, and the importance of duty to family and state. These were the seeds from which Caesar's later understanding of leadership would grow. Even as a small child, Caesar displayed the quick wit and charm that would serve him throughout his life. Neighbors in the Suburra would have watched him play in the narrow streets, perhaps noting how other children seemed naturally drawn to follow his lead, even in their simple games. There was something magnetic about the boy, a quality that made people want to listen when he spoke, even when his words were just the innocent observations of childhood. The political landscape of Caesar's early years was marked by the tensions between the traditional patrician families and the growing influence of successful generals and wealthy plebeians. His family, while noble, was not among the inner circle of Rome's most powerful clans. This positioned young Caesar in a unique space, close enough to power to understand its workings, yet distant enough to see its limitations and possibilities with fresh eyes. As Caesar grew from infant to toddler, Rome itself was evolving. The Republic was expanding, bringing new lands, peoples, and ideas into its embrace. Trade routes stretched across the Mediterranean, carrying not just goods, but stories and knowledge from distant corners of the world. In this cosmopolitan atmosphere, young Caesar's mind was exposed to the vast possibilities that lay beyond the familiar hills of his hometown. The religious life of Rome surrounded Caesar's childhood like incense in a temple. The family would have participated in the ancient rituals that marked the seasons and honored the gods who protected their city. Young Caesar learned to revere Jupiter, Mars, and the other deities who watched over Roman fortunes, never imagining that one day he himself would be proclaimed a god. In the gentle evenings of his early years, as oil lamps flickered in the windows of Roman homes and the city settled into peaceful rest, Caesar's future lay hidden in the soft folds of possibility. He was simply a beloved child in a loving family, protected by tradition and nurtured by parents who recognized his exceptional potential. And so we leave young Caesar in those precious early moments, surrounded by the warmth of family love and the protective embrace of a civilization that had endured for centuries. Rest now, dear listener, in the knowledge that even the greatest figures in history began as children, innocent and full of dreams, just as we all once were. The soft light of dawn filtering through the windows of the Caesar family home brought with it the gentle sounds of a household awakening to purpose. As young Gaius grew from his earliest years into boyhood, his days took on the structured rhythm that would shape a Roman citizen of his station. At the age of 6, when most children were still lost in the realm of play, Caesar began his formal education under the watchful guidance of carefully chosen tutors in the quiet corners of his family's domas. Surrounded by scrolls and wax tablets, Caesar discovered the magical world of letters and words. His first teacher, a learned Greek slave named Marcus, possessed the patience of a saint and the wisdom of ages. In those peaceful morning hours, before the heat of the Roman sun grew too intense, Marcus would guide his young pupil through the fundamentals of reading and writing, watching with quiet satisfaction as Caesar's natural intelligence bloomed like flowers in spring. The Greek language came to Caesar as naturally as breathing. This was no mere academic exercise, but a key that unlocked the treasures of human thought. Through Homer's verses, young Caesar walked beside Achilles on the plains of Troy and sailed with Odysseus across wine-dark seas. The rhythmic beauty of Greek poetry soothed his mind while stirring his imagination, teaching him that words possessed a power that could move souls across centuries. Mathematics, too, found fertile ground in Caesar's developing mind. The logical progression of numbers and the elegant solutions to geometric problems appealed to his sense of order and beauty. His tutor would often find him tracing geometric patterns in the sand of the family's small garden, lost in contemplation of the underlying harmony that governed all things. But it was in the study of rhetoric that young Caesar truly began to shine. The art of persuasion, so central to Roman public life, seemed to flow through his veins like inherited music. His tutors marveled at how naturally he could construct arguments. How instinctively he understood the rhythm and flow of persuasive speech. Even in practice exercises, debating hypothetical cases, or defending imaginary clients, Caesar displayed a gift that marked him as special among his peers. The afternoons of his boyhood were often spent in the company of other young Romans from noble families. Together, they would gather in gardens or courtyards, their voices mingling in discussion of philosophy, history, and the great questions that had occupied human minds since time began. Caesar was invariably at the center of these conversations, not through pushiness or arrogance, but through the natural magnetism that drew others to seek his thoughts and opinions. His mother Aurelia watched her son's development with the keen eye of someone who understood both his potential and the dangers that awaited those who stood too tall in Roman society. She ensured that his education included not just intellectual pursuits, but also the moral philosophy that would guide his character. The works of Plato and Aristotle became his companions, teaching him about justice, virtue, and the responsibilities that came with great ability. Physical education, too, played its part in shaping the future leader. In the Campus Martis, the great field where Roman youth trained for military service, Caesar learned to handle weapons, to ride horses, and to endure the rigors that would one day serve him on distant battlefields. Yet even here, his natural leadership qualities emerged. Other boys looked to him for guidance in their exercises, sensing in him a quality that marked future commanders. The religious ceremonies of Rome provided another dimension to Caesar's education. He learned the ancient rituals by which Romans honored their gods and maintained the Pax Deorum, the peace with the divine that protected their city. In the solemn moments of sacrifice and prayer, young Caesar absorbed the deep reverence for tradition that would always remain a part of his character. Even as he later revolutionized that same tradition, evening hours in the Caesar household were times of particular beauty. As the family gathered for their evening meal, conversation would flow around the triclinium like gentle streams converging into a river. Caesar's father would share news from the forum. His mother would contribute her own insights, and young Gaius would listen with the intense attention of one who sensed that these discussions were preparing him for something greater. The bonds formed during these childhood years would prove crucial throughout Caesar's life. His friendship with Marcus Brutus, whose mother Servilia was close to Aurelia, began in these innocent days of shared lessons and boyhood adventures. How neither could have imagined the tragedy that would eventually tear their friendship apart. When duty and politics would place them on opposite sides of history's greatest stage. As Caesar approached the threshold of adolescence, his tutors began to prepare him for the next phase of his education, the study of law and oratory that would equip him for public service. The gentle foundations laid in these childhood years had created a mind both powerful and flexible, capable of great thoughts and noble deeds. The stars above Rome shone down on a household where love and learning intertwined like ivy on ancient walls. In the quiet of evening, as oil lamps flickered and the day's lessons settled into memory, young Caesar would drift into sleep, his dreams perhaps touched by visions of the great deeds that lay hidden in his future. Rest now, gentle listener, in the peaceful knowledge that greatness grows slowly, nurtured by patience, love, and the steady accumulation of wisdom. The soft morning mist that often cloaked Rome in her early hours seemed particularly thick on the day that would mark a turning point in young Caesar's life. At the age of 15, when Roman boys traditionally received their toga virilis and entered the world of adult responsibility, Caesar found himself chosen for an honor that would set his path on a trajectory toward greatness and danger. The position of Flamen Dialis, high priest of Jupiter, had fallen vacant, and the College of Pontiffs, led by Caesar's uncle by marriage, Gaius Marius, had selected young Gaius for this sacred role. In the quiet chambers where such momentous decisions were made, far from the bustle of the forum, Caesar's fate was being woven by hands he could not see, guided by currents of politics and religion that ran deeper than the Tiber itself. To become Flamen Dialis meant to step into a world of ancient rituals and sacred responsibilities. The high priest of Jupiter was bound by numerous religious restrictions. He could not touch iron, could not see an army in battle array, could not be away from Rome for more than a single night. For most young Romans, such limitations would have felt like chains. Guise, with his deep reverence for tradition and his natural inclination toward the sacred mysteries, saw in this appointment a pathway to understanding the divine forces that shaped human destiny. The marriage that came with his priestly appointment brought another profound change to Caesar's life. Cornelia, daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, was chosen as his bride, not merely because of political alliance, though that played its part, but because the Flamen Dialis was required to be married to a patrician woman of unquestioned virtue. The wedding ceremony, conducted according to the ancient rites of confarreatio, bound them together, not just as husband and wife, but as sacred partners in the service of Rome's greatest god. In those early days of marriage, Caesar discovered in Cornelia a mind that matched his own in quickness and depth. She was barely 14, he 16, yet together they brought a mature dedication to their sacred duties that impressed even Rome's most experienced priests. In the quiet moments between religious ceremonies, they would walk in their garden, discussing philosophy, poetry, and their dreams for the future that stretched before them like an uncharted sea. The daily rituals of the Flamen Dialis filled Caesar's hours with purpose and solemnity. Each dawn brought prescribed prayers to Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, the best and greatest, whose protection watched over the Roman people. In the sacred grove on the Capitoline Hill, Caesar would offer incense and libations, feeling the weight of centuries-old tradition flowing through his young hands. These moments of communion with the divine taught him lessons about patience, dedication, and the mysterious ways in which fate shapes the lives of mortals. Yet, even as Caesar embraced his priestly duties, the political world of Rome continued to spin around him like a whirlwind. His uncle Marius, the great general who had reformed the Roman legions and won stunning victories against barbarian invaders, found himself locked in deadly conflict with Lucius Cornelius Sulla, another general of equally formidable reputation. Their struggle was not merely personal, but represented two different visions of Rome's future, one favoring the popular assemblies, the other the traditional authority of the Senate. When Sulla's forces finally prevailed and he assumed the dictatorship, young Caesar found himself in an impossible position. His marriage to Cornelia made him part of the losing faction, and Sulla demanded that he divorce her and marry someone more politically acceptable. In this moment, the young priest faced his first great test of character, standing in Sulla's presence, surrounded by the dictator's stern advisors and feeling the weight of potential exile or death. Caesar chose love and honor over political expediency. His refusal to divorce Cornelia was delivered with the same quiet dignity that would mark all his great speeches. "I cannot break sacred vows made before the gods," he said simply, his voice steady despite his youth. "What heaven has joined, no earthly power should tear asunder." Sulla's reaction was swift and predictable. Caesar was stripped of his priesthood, his inheritance was confiscated, and his life hung by the slenderest of threads. Only the intervention of powerful friends and family members, including the vested virgins whose sacred status gave them unique influence, saved him from execution. Instead, he was forced into exile, leaving behind everything he had known and loved for an uncertain future in distant lands. The night before his departure from Rome, Caesar walked one last time through the gardens of his childhood home. Cornelia beside him, her hand gentle in his. They spoke in whispers of their hopes that this separation would be temporary, that somehow the political storms would pass and they would be reunited in happier times. The courage she showed in that dark hour, her willingness to support his principled stand, even at great personal cost, strengthened his resolve and deepened his love for this remarkable young woman. As Caesar prepared to leave Rome, he carried with him the lessons learned in his brief time as Flamen Dialis. The daily communion with divine mysteries had taught him about the larger patterns that govern human affairs. The responsibility for maintaining sacred traditions had shown him how individual actions could affect the welfare of entire communities. Most importantly, his willingness to sacrifice everything rather than betray his principles had revealed the strength of character that would carry him through all the trials to come. The stars above Rome seemed especially bright on that last night, as if Jupiter himself were blessing the young man who had served him with such devotion. In the gentle darkness, Caesar took his final rest in the city of his birth, dreaming perhaps of distant shores and unknown adventures, never imagining that his exile would prove to be not an ending but a beginning, the first chapter in a story that would reshape the world. Sleep now, dear listener, in the peaceful knowledge that sometimes our greatest challenges become the doorways to our greatest triumphs, and that love and honor, though they may cost us dearly, are the treasures that make life truly worth living. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull of a Roman merchant vessel provided a soothing rhythm as Caesar's ship pulled away from the familiar shores of Italy. The year was 80 BCE, and the young exile stood at the stern, watching his homeland grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely into the morning haze. At barely 20 years of age, stripped of his priesthood and fortune, he was venturing into a world that would test every lesson learned in his privileged Roman childhood. His first destination was the court of Nicomedes IV in Bithynia, a client kingdom of Rome nestled along the shores of the Black Sea. The journey itself became Caesar's first true education in the wider world beyond Rome's 7 hills. As the ship made its way eastward, stopping at ports throughout the Greek islands and along the coast of Asia Minor, Caesar encountered peoples and customs that broadened his understanding of the human experience. In Rhodes, he paused to study rhetoric under Apollonius Molon, the greatest teacher of his age. The master's villa overlooked the azure waters of the Mediterranean, and in its peaceful chambers, Caesar refined the oratorical skills that had shown such promise in his youth. Hour after gentle hour, he practiced the art of persuasion, learning not just technique, but the deeper truths about how words could touch the human heart and change the course of history. The months spent in study were interrupted by an incident that would become one of the most famous stories of Caesar's early life. Pirates, those wolves of the sea who preyed upon Mediterranean commerce, captured his ship during a routine voyage. These rough men, accustomed to inspiring terror in their victims, found themselves dealing with a captive unlike any they had encountered before. When the pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents for his release, Caesar laughed with genuine amusement. 20 talents? He asked, his voice carrying the natural authority that never left him, even in chains. Do you not know who I am? I am worth at least 50 talents. His captors, bewildered by a prisoner who seemed to consider their ransom demand an insult to his dignity rather than a threat to his life, eventually agreed to the higher sum. During the weeks that followed, while messengers traveled to arrange his ransom, Caesar transformed his captivity into something resembling a house party. He joined the pirates' games, shared their meals, and even composed poems which he recited to them in the evenings by firelight. When they failed to show proper appreciation for his literary efforts, he would cheerfully inform them that he would have them all crucified once he was free. A promise they took as mere bravado from a young nobleman trying to maintain his dignity in desperate circumstances. The ransom was eventually paid, and Caesar departed his pirate captors with expressions of genuine fondness all around. They had grown fond of this unusual young Roman, who treated imprisonment as an opportunity for entertainment rather than a cause for despair. What they did not know was that Caesar's casual threats had been entirely serious. Within days of his release, he had organized a fleet, hunted down his former captors, and captured them all. True to his word, he had them crucified, though, characteristically, he ordered their throats cut first to spare them unnecessary suffering. This incident revealed something profound about Caesar's character that would mark all his future dealings. He possessed an extraordinary ability to win the loyalty and affection of those around him, regardless of their station in life. The pirates who had held him captive came to respect and even love him. The sailors who served on his pursuit fleet would have followed him to the ends of the earth. It was a gift that would serve him well in the years to come. His time in the East also brought Caesar into contact with the philosophical schools that flourished in Greek cities. In Athens, he walked the paths where Plato and Aristotle had taught, absorbing wisdom that would influence his approach to governance and law. Stoic emphasis on duty and self-control resonated deeply with his Roman upbringing, while the Epicurean appreciation for friendship and moderate pleasure added warmth to his austere sense of responsibility. The letters he wrote to Cornelia during these months of exile reveal a young man growing in wisdom and confidence despite his circumstances. He wrote of sunsets over distant seas, of philosophical discussions that lasted until dawn, of the fascinating diversity of peoples and customs he encountered in his travels. Yet through it all ran an undercurrent of longing for home and the woman who had chosen to share his uncertain fate. News from Rome filtered slowly to Caesar's eastern refuges. Sulla's harsh rule continued to reshape Roman society, eliminating enemies and rewarding supporters with ruthless efficiency. Many of Caesar's friends and family members have fled into exile or met violent ends, yet gradually, reports began to suggest that the dictator's grip was loosening, that perhaps the time was approaching when it might be safe for young Caesar to return home. The education Caesar received during his years of wandering proved invaluable. He learned to speak Greek with native fluency and became familiar with the customs and dialects of a dozen different peoples. More importantly, he developed the cosmopolitan outlook that would later enable him to govern an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt. The world was vast and varied. He learned, but human nature remained remarkably consistent across all boundaries of language and culture. As word reached him that Sulla had resigned his dictatorship and retired to private life, Caesar began to prepare for his return to Rome. The years of exile were ending, but they had not been wasted. The young man who would soon reclaim his place in Roman society had gained something far more valuable than the wealth and position Sulla had taken from him. He had discovered his own strength, learned to navigate the complexities of a dangerous world, and developed the personal magnetism that would carry him to heights unimaginable at the time of his departure. The ship that carried Caesar back toward Italy sailed through calm seas under star-filled skies. In the gentle darkness of the Mediterranean night, he stood once again at the rail, tending but this time watching the familiar coastline of his homeland grow larger with each passing hour. The exile was coming home, transformed by his trials into something more than he had been when he left. Rest peacefully, dear listener, knowing that sometimes the paths that lead us away from home are the very ones that prepare us to find our true destiny. The gentle morning light that illuminated the Roman Forum on Caesar's return cast long shadows between the ancient columns, as if the very stones remembered the young man who had been forced to flee years before. It was 78 BCE when Caesar stepped once more onto the familiar paving stones of his homeland's heart. It's no longer the exiled youth who had departed in fear and uncertainty, but a seasoned traveler whose eyes held wisdom gained from distant shores and dangerous adventures. The Rome that welcomed him home had changed during his absence. Sulla's brutal restructuring of society had left scars that would take generations to heal, but the dictator's unexpected resignation and subsequent death had created new opportunities for ambitious young men willing to navigate the treacherous currents of Republican politics. Caesar found himself returning to a city where old certainties had crumbled and new possibilities beckoned to those bold enough to seize them. His reunion with Cornelia was a moment of quiet joy that illuminated the deeper chambers of his heart. In their private moments, away from the public stage where their lives would soon unfold. They spoke in gentle tones of the trials they had endured separately and their hopes for the future they would build together. The love that had sustained them through years of separation had, if anything, grown stronger through testing. Like gold, refined in fire. Caesar's return to public life began modestly, as was fitting for a young man whose early career had been interrupted by political upheaval. He established himself as an advocate in the courts, using the rhetorical skills perfected during his Eastern exile to defend clients and pursue justice according to Roman law. His first major case, prosecuting Gnaeus Cornelius Dolabella for extortion during his governorship of Macedonia, demonstrated both his legal acumen and his courage in challenging powerful interests. Though Dolabella was ultimately acquitted, the Roman courts were notoriously susceptible to bribery and political influence. Caesar's eloquent prosecution won him recognition throughout the city. Legal experts praised his thorough preparation and masterful delivery, while ordinary citizens appreciated his willingness to champion their interests against corrupt officials. The young advocate was building a reputation as someone who could not be intimidated by wealth or status. The daily rhythm of Caesar's life during these years was marked by the serene disciplines of legal practice and political networking. Dawn would find him in his study, surrounded by scrolls and wax tablets, preparing cases with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized all his endeavors. The philosophical training of his youth served him well in unraveling complex legal questions and constructing arguments that appealed to both logic and emotion. His afternoons were often spent in the Forum Romanum, that magnificent space where the business of the Republic, unfolded in a constant drama of speeches, debates, and negotiations. Here, Caesar began to build the web of relationships that would support his later rise to prominence. His natural charm and quick wit made him a welcome presence at the informal gatherings where the real work of Roman politics took place. The evening hours brought different pleasures. Caesar and Cornelia often hosted intimate dinner parties in their modest home, gathering around their table a carefully chosen mix of rising politicians, established senators, poets, philosophers, and successful businessmen. These gatherings became known throughout Rome for their combination of intellectual stimulation and warm hospitality. Caesar possessed the rare gift of making each guest feel that their presence was essential to the evening's success. It was during one of these evenings that news arrived which would bring profound joy and new responsibility to Caesar's life. Cornelia was with child, and their first daughter would be born in the following year. The prospect of fatherhood filled Caesar with a tender happiness that showed itself in the gentle way he cared for his wife during her pregnancy, and in his obvious delight in discussing plans for their child's future. Little Julia's birth brought a completeness to Caesar's personal life that had been missing during his years of exile and struggle. In the quiet moments when he held his infant daughter, feeling her tiny fingers curl around his own, the ambitious young politician disappeared entirely, placed by a man overwhelmed by the protective love that parenthood awakens. Cornelia, watching her husband cradle their child, saw in his expression a tenderness that few Romans of his generation ever allowed themselves to display. The responsibilities of fatherhood coincided with Caesar's growing recognition as one of Rome's most promising young leaders. His legal victories had established his competence, while his personal charm had won him friendships across the political spectrum. He began to be mentioned as a candidate for the lower magistracies that marked the beginning of a successful political career. Caesar's approach to these early political campaigns revealed the strategic thinking that would characterize all his later endeavors. Rather than relying solely on family connections or inherited wealth, both of which were limited in his case, he built coalitions based on shared interests and mutual respect. Veterans appreciated his military knowledge gained during brief service in Asia. Merchants valued his understanding of commercial law, and ordinary citizens responded to his genuine concern for their welfare. The religious dimension of Roman public life also provided Caesar with opportunities to demonstrate his fitness for high office. His early training as Flamen Dialis had given him deep knowledge of sacred traditions, and he used this expertise to serve on various priestly committees and religious observances. In these roles, he displayed the same careful attention to detail and respectful observance of ancient customs that marked all his public duties. As Caesar's reputation grew, so did the expectations placed upon him by friends and supporters. The Roman political system was intensely personal, based on networks of mutual obligation and shared ambition. Success in this environment required not just ability, but also the kind of character that inspired lasting loyalty. Caesar's combination of competence, charm, integrity was beginning to mark him as someone who could rise to the highest levels of Roman society. the peaceful years of Caesar's early political career, spent building relationships and establishing his reputation, were drawing to a close as greater opportunities and challenges beckoned. But in these gentle months of domestic happiness and professional growth, he experienced a contentment that would sustain him through all the trials to come. Rest now, dear listener, in the knowledge that even the most ambitious souls treasure most deeply those quiet moments of love and family that give life its deepest meaning. The soft murmur of administrative business filled the halls of the Treasury building as Caesar took up his first significant magistracy in 69 BCE, the office of quaestor. While modest in the grand hierarchy of Roman politics, carried with it profound responsibilities. The careful stewardship of Rome's financial resources and the sacred trust of the Roman people in their chosen representatives. At 31 years of age, Caesar approached these duties with the methodical precision that would mark all his administrative endeavors. The daily routine of a quaestor was far removed from the dramatic oratory of the courts or the passionate debates of the Senate. Instead, it demanded patience, attention to detail, and an absolute commitment to honesty in dealing with public funds. Caesar's morning hours were spent reviewing accounts, authorizing expenditures, and ensuring that every sestertius of Rome's treasure was properly recorded and accounted for. In these seemingly mundane tasks, he found a deep satisfaction that came from serving the Republic with integrity and competence. His colleagues in the treasury quickly learned to respect Caesar's thoroughness and fairness. He possessed an unusual ability to remember vast amounts of numerical detail, often correcting clerks' calculations from memory and catching discrepancies that others might have missed. More importantly, his handling of financial matters was marked by transparency and honesty that was, sadly, not universal among Roman magistrates of the time. The position of quaestor also brought with it the automatic right to membership in the Senate, that august body which guided the Republic's destiny through debate and collective wisdom. Caesar's first appearance in the Senate House was a moment of quiet pride, not just for himself, but for Cornelia and little Julia, who understood that their husband and father had joined the ranks of Rome's governing elite through merit and hard work rather than mere inheritance. In the Senate's marble chambers, Caesar initially followed the traditional path of junior senators, listening more than speaking and learning the complex customs that governed the body's proceedings. When he did rise to address his colleagues, it was typically on matters related to financial administration, where his expertise as quaestor gave weight to his words. Speeches were marked by clarity of thought and a genuine concern for the public welfare that impressed even seasoned senators. The bonds Caesar formed during his quaestorship extended beyond the Senate House to encompass a wide range of Roman society. His fair dealing with contractors and suppliers earned him the respect of the business community, while his careful attention to veterans' payment schedules won him gratitude from former soldiers throughout the city. These relationships, built on trust and mutual respect, would prove invaluable in his later career. Personal tragedy struck during Caesar's term as quaestor with the death of his beloved Cornelia. The young woman who had shared his exile and supported his rise had succumbed to complications following another pregnancy, leaving Caesar devastated and little Julia motherless. The funeral ceremony, conducted with all the ancient dignity that Roman tradition prescribed, became a profound expression of public sympathy for a leader who had won the hearts of his fellow citizens. Caesar's funeral oration for Cornelia broke with Roman tradition in its deeply personal and emotional tone. Standing before the assembled mourners in the Forum, his voice steady despite his grief, he spoke not of political achievements or family connections, but of the love that had sustained them both through years of trial. "She was the partner of my soul," he said simply, "the mother of my heart's delight, the woman who chose honor over safety and love over comfort." The crowd listened in respectful silence, many moved to tears by this glimpse into the private heart of a public man. The months following Cornelius' death were perhaps the most challenging of Caesar's young life. Balancing his demanding public duties with the needs of his motherless daughter required reserves of strength he sometimes feared he did not possess. In the quiet evenings when official business was finished, he would sit with Julia, reading to her from the poets they both loved, or simply holding her close, while they watched the stars emerge over Rome's ancient hills. It was during this period of personal sorrow that Caesar's quaestorship took on an unexpected dimension. He was assigned to serve under the praetor in Tistos Vetus in Hispania Ulterior, a distant province that encompassed much of modern Spain. The prospect of leaving Rome so soon after Cornelius' death was painful, but the duties of office could not be ignored, and Caesar prepared for his first extended service in the provinces with characteristic thoroughness. The journey to Hispania provided Caesar with his first extended experience of military life since his brief service in Asia during his youth. Traveling with a small staff and a modest escort of soldiers, he witnessed firsthand the challenges of governing Rome's far-flung territories. The roads built by Roman engineers carried their party through landscapes of stunning beauty and practical difficulty. From the rolling hills of Gaul to the rugged mountains that guarded the Iberian Peninsula, in Hispania, Caesar's administrative talents found a new expression in the complex task of provincial governance. The province was home to numerous tribes, each with its own customs and languages, as well as established Roman colonies and trading centers. The successful administration of such a diverse territory required not just financial expertise, but also diplomatic skill and cultural sensitivity. Caesar threw himself into his provincial duties with an energy that helped distract from his personal grief. He traveled extensively throughout the territory, visiting remote settlements and establishing personal relationships with local leaders. His ability to learn languages quickly served him well, and he soon was conducting basic conversations in several native dialects, a gesture that earned him considerable goodwill among the provincial population. The financial administration of the province provided Caesar with invaluable experience in the practical challenges of imperial governance. He oversaw tax collection, managed the payment of Roman troops, supervised the public works projects that were slowly transforming Hispania into a fully integrated part of the Roman world. His meticulous records and fair dealing with both Roman citizens and provincial subjects earned him recognition from his superiors and gratitude from those under his authority. One incident during his Spanish service would later become legendary, though its historical accuracy remains debated. Caesar, visiting the ancient city of Gades, modern Cadiz, reportedly paused before a statue of Alexander the Great and wept at the thought that the Macedonian conqueror had achieved so much at such a young age, while he himself, at 32, had accomplished so little. Whether this story is literally true or merely symbolic, it captures something essential about Caesar's driving ambition and his sense that destiny had marked him for greatness. The completion of his quaestorship in Hispania marked the end of Caesar's apprenticeship in Roman public service. He had demonstrated competence in financial administration, proven his ability to work effectively with diverse populations, and shown the kind of personal integrity that was essential for long-term political success. The young widower who returned to Rome carried with him not only the experience gained in provincial service, but also a deeper understanding of the vast world that Roman authority encompassed. His homecoming was marked by a reunion with Julia that filled his heart with joy. The little girl had grown during his absence, and their embrace in the doorway of their Roman home reminded him of what truly mattered in life. The ambitious young politician had learned that public service, however demanding, must always be balanced against the claims of family and personal happiness. As Caesar settled back into Roman life, preparing for the next stage of his political career, he could look back on his quaestorship with genuine satisfaction. He had served Rome faithfully and well, gained invaluable experience in both domestic and provincial administration, and maintained his reputation for honesty and competence despite the personal trials that had marked these years. The peaceful evening hours spent with Julia, reading together by lamplight or walking in their small garden, provided the emotional foundation that would sustain Caesar through all the challenges to come. In these quiet moments of domestic happiness, the future conqueror of Gaul and transformer of Rome was simply a loving father, content in the knowledge that he had served his city with honor and raised his daughter with care. Rest now, gentle listener, in the understanding that even those destined for the highest achievements find their greatest joy in the simplest pleasures: the love of family, the satisfaction of duty well performed, and the peaceful contentment that comes from living according to one's deepest values. The gentle rustle of silk banners in the morning breeze announced the beginning of another day in Caesar's revolutionary aedileship, that magistracy which would transform not only his political fortunes, but the very experience of Roman civic life. The year was 65 BCE, and Caesar, now 35 and remarried to Pompey, granddaughter of the great Sulla, had undertaken the office responsible for the city's festivals, public works, and grain supply with an ambition that both dazzled and concerned his contemporaries. The traditional duties of an aedile, maintaining temples, overseeing markets, organizing public games, had been transformed in Caesar's capable hands into something approaching high art. His approach to the position revealed the same meticulous attention to detail that had marked his financial service. It now applied to the grand theater of public spectacle that lay at the heart of Roman civic life. The morning of the Ludi Romani dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the games that would showcase Caesar's vision of what public entertainment could become. Her previous edicts had presented the traditional chariot races and gladiatorial contests with workmanlike competence. Caesar had conceived something entirely new, a festival that would engage every sense and touch every emotion of the Roman people. The Circus Maximus, that great oval arena that could hold a quarter of Rome's population, had been decorated with silken awnings in brilliant colors that seemed to capture and intensify the golden light of the Italian sun. The sand of the arena floor had been raked into perfect patterns, and the starting gates for the chariot races gleamed with fresh paint and polished bronze. Every detail, from the cushions provided for spectators to the quality of wine sold by vendors, reflected Caesar's determination that this festival would be remembered for generations. The gladiatorial contests that formed the centerpiece of Caesar's games broke new ground in both scale and sophistication. Rather than the modest number of fighters typically provided by edicts, Caesar presented over 300 pairs of gladiators, each equipped with weapons and armor of extraordinary quality. The combats themselves were choreographed with an artistic sensibility that elevated them above mere displays of violence into something approaching tragic drama. But it was Caesar's innovation in staging that truly set his games apart from all predecessors. He had commissioned a troupe of Greek artists to create elaborate scenic backgrounds that transformed the arena into exotic landscapes, Egyptian temples, Germanic forests, even reconstructions of famous battlefields from Roman history. As the gladiators fought, they seemed to inhabit these imagined worlds, their conflicts taking on symbolic dimensions that resonated with the watching crowds. The public response to Caesar's aedileship was immediate and overwhelming. Citizens who had grown weary of the routine spectacles offered by other magistrates found themselves transported by events that combined visual splendor with emotional depth. Children spoke of nothing but the amazing displays they had witnessed, while their parents marveled at the organizational skill required to coordinate such complex entertainments. Caesar's attention to the welfare of ordinary Romans extended far beyond spectacular games. He had used his position to address the chronic problems of food distribution and market regulation that affected daily life throughout the city. His reforms of the grain supply system ensured more reliable access to affordable food, while his strict oversight of weights and measures protected consumers from dishonest merchants. The restoration of ancient temples and public buildings provided another avenue for Caesar's administrative talents. Rather than simply maintaining existing structures, he had undertaken ambitious renovation projects that restored these sacred spaces to their original glory, while incorporating subtle improvements in both function and beauty. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, in particular, benefited from his attention, its ancient majesty enhanced by careful restoration work. The financial cost of Caesar's magnificent aedileship was enormous, far exceeding the modest budget traditionally allocated to the office. He had borrowed heavily to fund his innovations, taking on debts that would shape his political choices for years to come. Yet this investment in public goodwill proved remarkably successful. Caesar's popularity among all classes of Roman society reached heights rarely achieved by any magistrate. His colleague in the aedileship, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, found himself completely overshadowed by Caesar's theatrical brilliance, where Bibulus followed traditional patterns and stayed within conventional budgets. Caesar's innovations captured public attention and affection to such a degree that few Romans could even remember who the other aedile was. This dynamic would recur throughout Caesar's career, his ability to dominate any stage he shared with others. The social dimension of Caesar's success as aedile was equally important. The evening receptions he and Pompey hosted during the festival season became the most sought-after invitations in Roman society. Their home was transformed into a gathering place where senators mingled with successful merchants, where poets shared tables with generals, and where the vibrant diversity of Roman life found elegant expression. Caesar's marriage to Pompey had brought political advantages through her family connections, but their relationship lacked the deep emotional bond he had shared with Cornelia. Pompey was beautiful, well-educated, and socially accomplished, yet something essential was missing from their union. Caesar treated her with courtesy and respect, but those who had known him during his first marriage could see that his heart remained guarded, protected by the walls grief had built. Little Julia, now approaching adolescence, served increasingly as her father's unofficial hostess at public events. Her natural grace and quick intelligence made her a favorite with Rome's elite families, while her genuine warmth endeared her to ordinary citizens who encountered her during her father's public appearances. In her, Caesar's political allies could see the promise of future dynastic connections, while Caesar himself saw simply the daughter who remained his greatest joy. The success of Caesar's aedileship established him as one of Rome's most promising political figures, but it also created expectations that would prove difficult to fulfill. The Roman people had experienced what public service could achieve when guided by vision and supported by adequate resources. They would expect no less from Caesar's future endeavors, a challenge that both inspired and concerned those who understood the practical limitations of republican government. As the festival season drew to a close and Caesar prepared to transition from his year of spectacular public service, he could look back with satisfaction on achievements that had exceeded his most ambitious dreams. He had demonstrated that the traditional forms of Roman civic life could be revitalized through creativity and generous investment, that public service could inspire rather than merely administer, and that political success could be built on genuine service to the common good. The evening air carried the sounds of a city settling into peaceful rest after days of unprecedented celebration. In his private study, Caesar reviewed the accounts of his aedileship one final time, noting with characteristic precision both the costs incurred and the benefits achieved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight belonged to quiet satisfaction and the gentle pride that comes from duty splendidly performed. Rest now, dear listener, in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest leaders are those who understand that service to others can be its own reward, and that the trust of a people, once earned through excellence, becomes a treasure more valuable than gold or silver. The sacred flames that had burned in the temple of Vesta for over 6 centuries flickered in the gentle evening breeze, as Rome prepared for one of the most significant religious elections in its history. The position of Pontifex Maximus, the high priest who served as the bridge between the Roman people and their gods, had fallen vacant with the death of Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius, and the competition to succeed him would test every political skill Caesar had developed during his remarkable career. At 37 years of age, Caesar faced formidable opponents in this sacred contest. Quintus Lutatius Catulus, a man of impeccable reputation and extensive experience, represented the conservative traditions that had guided Rome for generations. Publius Ceruleus Vasha, another distinguished senator with a brilliant military record, commanded respect throughout the city. Against such established figures, Caesar's candidacy seemed audacious, even presumptuous to some observers. Yet Caesar approached this election with the same strategic thinking that had marked all his political endeavors. The position of Pontifex Maximus was unique in Roman politics. It was held for life, carried enormous prestige, and was chosen not by the Senate or magistrates, but by a special assembly of 17 tribes selected by lot. This meant that success would depend not on the approval of Rome's elite, but on the support of ordinary citizens from across the social spectrum. The morning of the election dawned with unusual tension throughout the city. Caesar rose early, as was his custom, and spent the pre-dawn hours in quiet meditation. The significance of the day was not lost on him. Victory would place him at the apex of Roman religious authority, while defeat might effectively end his political career under the weight of the enormous debts he had accumulated financing his campaigns. The electoral process began with the solemn rituals that marked all sacred occasions in Roman life. Augurs read the omens in the flight of birds. Priests offered sacrifices to ensure divine favor. And the ancient prayers that had protected Rome since its founding were recited with particular care. Caesar participated in these ceremonies with the deep reverence that had marked his approach to religious duties since his youth. As the voting commenced, Caesar's supporters moved through the crowds with practiced efficiency, reminding citizens of his generous service as aedile, his integrity as quaestor, and his lifelong devotion to Roman religious traditions. His early training as flamen dialis, though cut short by political circumstances, had given him an understanding of sacred law that few of his competitors could match. The contest was remarkably close, with each candidate drawing support from different segments of Roman society. Catullus, appealed to those who valued traditional authority and conservative governance, while Vash's military achievements resonated with veterans and their families. Caesar's base lay among the broader citizenry, who remembered his spectacular games and fair administration of civic duties. When the votes were finally tallied and announced, Caesar's victory margin was narrow but decisive. The roar of approval from his supporters echoed off the ancient walls of the Forum, while his defeated rivals accepted the outcome with the dignified grace expected of Roman statesmen. In that moment, Caesar had achieved something remarkable. In 63 BCE, at an age when most politicians were still climbing the ladder of advancement, he had secured a lifetime position of supreme religious authority. The implications of Caesar's elevation to Pontifex Maximus extended far beyond his personal career. As the chief interpreter of religious law and the guardian of sacred traditions, he now possessed influence over every aspect of Roman public life. Religious considerations touched everything from the timing of elections to the conduct of military campaigns, giving the Pontifex Maximus a voice in virtually all significant governmental decisions. Caesar's first actions in his new role demonstrated careful balance between innovation and tradition that would characterize his religious leadership. He undertook a comprehensive review of the sacred calendar, correcting accumulated errors that had gradually shifted religious festivals away from their proper seasonal timing. This technical but important work required deep knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, skills Caesar had developed during his youth and refined through decades of study. The residence of the Pontifex Maximus, located in the heart of the Forum near the Temple of Vesta, became Caesar's new home, requiring him to move from the private house where he had lived with Pompey and Julia. The official residence carried both privileges and responsibilities. It was one of Rome's most prestigious addresses. But it also meant that Caesar's family life would be conducted under the constant scrutiny that accompanied high religious office. Julia, now a young woman of remarkable beauty and intelligence, adapted to their new circumstances with the grace that had always marked her character. Her presence in the Pontifex Maximus's residence brought a warmth and vitality that softened the formal dignity of religious ceremonial. Visiting dignitaries and fellow priests alike were charmed by her combination of learning and natural ease. The relationship between Caesar and Pompey became increasingly strained during this period. The demands of his religious office, combined with his continued political ambitions, left little time for the intimate companionship that might have strengthened their marriage. Pompey, accustomed to the social prominence her position provided, found herself increasingly isolated in a household dominated by public duty and religious obligation. Caesar's administration of Rome's religious affairs reflected the same meticulous attention to detail that had marked his secular offices. He maintained careful records of all sacrifices and ceremonies, assured that the Vestal virgins had everything needed for their sacred duties, and oversaw the maintenance of the numerous temples and shrines throughout the city. His approach combined deep respect for ancient traditions with practical efficiency in their administration. The most significant challenge of Caesar's early tenure as Pontifex Maximus came with the Bona Dea scandal that would ultimately destroy his marriage to Pompeii. This ancient festival, sacred to the good goddess, was traditionally celebrated in the home of a senior magistrate by his wife and other noble women, with all men strictly excluded from the ceremonies. When Publius Clodius was discovered hiding in Caesar's house during the rites, disguised as a woman and allegedly seeking access to Pompeii, the resulting scandal threatened to undermine Caesar's religious authority. Caesar's handling of this crisis demonstrated the political wisdom that would serve him throughout his career, rather than defending Pompeii against whispered accusations of impropriety. He divorced her immediately while maintaining that he had no evidence of actual wrongdoing. Caesar's wife must be above suspicion, he declared, a phrase that would become proverbial in Roman culture and beyond. The divorce from Pompeii marked the end of a marriage that had served its political purpose but never achieved emotional depth. Caesar approached the separation with characteristic decisiveness, ensuring that Pompeii received generous financial support, while making clear that their paths would now diverge permanently. Their parting was conducted with dignity and mutual respect, despite the unfortunate circumstances that had made it necessary. As Caesar settled into his role as Rome's supreme religious authority, he found in these duties a satisfaction that complemented his political ambitions. The daily rituals of sacrifice and prayer, the careful interpretation of omens and portents, the oversight of festivals and ceremonies, all of these responsibilities connected him to the deepest traditions of Roman civilization, while providing a platform for the greater achievements that lay ahead. The evening hours in the Pontifex Maximus's residence often found Caesar in his private study, surrounded by the ancient text that contained the accumulated wisdom of Roman religious law. In the flickering light of oil lamps, Q would read and reflect on the sacred traditions he was sworn to protect. K, finding in their timeless wisdom guidance for the challenges of his turbulent age. Rest now, gentle listener, in the peaceful knowledge that some offices carry with them not just power and prestige, but also the sacred trust of generations past and future, and that those who accept such responsibilities do so not for personal glory, but in service to something, greater than themselves. The dusty roads of Hispania Ulterior stretched endlessly beneath the Spanish sun as Caesar, now praetor and provincial governor, embarked upon the campaign that would establish his reputation as one of Rome's most capable military commanders. The year was 61 BCE, and the man who had excelled in law courts and religious ceremonies was about to discover that his talents extended to the ancient art of war. The province that Caesar inherited was far from peaceful. The Lusitanian tribes, fierce mountain peoples who had never fully accepted Roman authority, controlled vast territories in what is now Portugal and western Spain. Their warriors, hardened by generations of conflict and intimate knowledge of the rugged terrain, had successfully resisted previous Roman attempts at conquest. For Caesar, They represented both a challenge and an opportunity. The Roman forces under Caesar's command were typical of provincial armies, a mixture of veteran legionnaires nearing the end of their service and newer recruits still learning the disciplines of military life. Many had grown soft during years of garrison duty, unaccustomed to the rigors of active campaigning. Caesar's first task was not to defeat external enemies, but to forge his diverse soldiers into an effective fighting force. The transformation began with Caesar's personal example. Unlike many commanders who remained safely behind the lines while their subordinates faced danger, Caesar made it his practice to share every hardship with his men. He marched on foot when the soldiers marched, ate the same rations they consumed, and slept on the ground when circumstances required it. This approach, unusual among aristocratic Roman officers, quickly earned him the devotion of his troops. Caesar's strategic approach to the Lusitanian campaign demonstrated the intellectual rigor he brought to military problems. Rather than launching immediate attacks against heavily fortified positions, he spent weeks studying the terrain, analyzing enemy movements, and identifying the key geographic points that controlled access to tribal territories. His careful preparation would prove decisive in the battles to come. The first major engagement of the campaign took place in a valley surrounded by steep hills, where a large Lusitanian force had positioned itself to block Roman advance. The tribal warriors, confident in their defensive advantages and superior knowledge of local conditions, waited for Caesar's legions to exhaust themselves in futile frontal assaults. Instead, they found themselves facing a commander who understood that victory often belongs not to the boldest, but to the most patient. Caesar's solution to the tactical problem was characteristically elegant, while maintaining the appearance of preparing for a direct assault. He secretly detached a portion of his force for a difficult night march through supposedly impassable mountain paths. When dawn broke, the Lusitanians found themselves attacked simultaneously from front and rear. Their defensive position transformed into a trap from which few escaped. The psychological impact of this victory extended far beyond the immediate tactical success. Word of Caesar's innovative tactics spread throughout the region, causing many tribal leaders to reconsider their resistance to Roman authority. Some chose to negotiate rather than fight, while others withdrew deeper into the mountains, conceding control of valuable territory without battle. Caesar's treatment of defeated enemies reflected the same combination of firmness and mercy that would characterize his later campaigns in Gaul. Warriors who surrendered were generally spared and often recruited into auxiliary units, serving alongside the legions. Tribal leaders who submitted were confirmed in authority over their people, binding them to roam through self-interest rather than fear alone. These policies created stability in conquered territories while reducing the garrison forces needed to maintain control. The wealth acquired through Caesar's Spanish victories proved crucial to his long-term political ambitions. The campaign yielded substantial quantities of gold and silver, much of which found its way into Caesar's personal treasury. This financial windfall allowed him to begin repaying the enormous debts accumulated during his earlier career while providing resources for future political endeavors. More importantly, Caesar's military successes earned him the formal recognition of the Roman Senate in the form of a triumph, the highest honor that could be accorded to a victorious general. The prospect of parading through Rome's streets, displaying captured treasures and enemy prisoners while receiving the acclamation of the people represented the pinnacle of aristocratic Roman ambition. The Spanish campaign also provided Caesar with invaluable experience in the practical aspects of military leadership. He learned to manage complex supply lines across difficult terrain, to maintain discipline among troops facing prolonged hardship, and to coordinate the movements of multiple units across extended battlefields. These skills would prove essential in the far greater challenges that awaited him in Gaul. Perhaps most significantly, Caesar discovered in himself a natural aptitude for military command that complemented his established talents in law and politics. His soldiers came to trust his judgment implicitly, confident that he would not waste their lives in pointless attacks or abandon them to superior enemy forces. This bond of mutual trust and respect became one of Caesar's greatest assets in all his subsequent campaigns. The administrative challenges of governing a newly conquered province provided another dimension to Caesar's education and leadership. Established new towns for veteran soldiers, created trade routes that connected remote regions to Mediterranean commerce, and implemented legal systems that balanced Roman law with local customs. These achievements demonstrated that Caesar's abilities extended beyond mere military conquest to encompass the complex art of imperial governance. The letters Caesar wrote to friends in Rome during his Spanish service reveal a man growing in confidence and ambition. The young politician, who had once seemed content with traditional offices, was beginning to envision possibilities that extended far beyond conventional career paths. The taste of independent command, of shaping events through personal decision and action, had awakened appetites that would drive him toward the extraordinary achievements of his later career. As his term as governor drew to a close, Caesar faced a crucial decision that would determine the trajectory of his future. The Senate had voted him a triumph for his Spanish victories, but claiming this honor would require him to remain outside Rome's sacred boundary until the ceremony could be conducted. Alternatively, he could enter the city immediately and stand for the consulship, Rome's highest regular magistracy, but thereby forfeit his right to triumphal celebration. The choice between immediate glory and future opportunity revealed Caesar's fundamental character. Despite the natural appeal of triumphal honors, he chose to sacrifice personal recognition for political advancement, entering Rome as a private citizen to begin his campaign for the consulship. This decision demonstrated the strategic thinking that consistently placed long-term objectives above short-term satisfaction. The general who returned from Spain was transformed from the man who had departed as praetor. Caesar had discovered in himself capabilities that even his closest friends had not suspected. while his soldiers carried back to Rome stories of a commander whose courage and skill had won their absolute loyalty. The stage was set for achievements that would dwarf even his impressive Spanish successes. In the quiet of evening, as Caesar settled once more into his residence as Pontifex Maximus, he could reflect with satisfaction on a year that had changed both his circumstances and his understanding of his own potential. The military laurels won in Spain had provided the foundation for greater ambitions, while the loyalty of battle-tested soldiers would prove invaluable in the struggles ahead. Rest now, gentle listener, knowing that sometimes our greatest discoveries come not from seeking new territories, but from exploring the hidden capabilities that lie within our own hearts and minds, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves to the world. The gentle shadows of evening stretched across Caesar's private garden as three of Rome's most powerful men gathered for a meeting that would reshape the destiny of the Republic. It was the year 60 BCE, and Caesar, recently returned from his successful Spanish campaign, was about to enter into an alliance that would provide the foundation for all his future achievements. The other participants in this momentous gathering were Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated military commander, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, whose vast wealth had made him one of the city's most influential figures. The circumstances that brought these three remarkable men together were rooted in the political frustrations each had experienced despite their individual successes. Pompey, having conquered vast territories in the east and eliminated the threat of Mediterranean piracy, found his arrangements for organizing newly acquired provinces blocked by senatorial opposition. Crassus, despite his crucial role in defeating Spartacus's slave rebellion, felt that his contributions to Roman security were undervalued by his aristocratic peers. Caesar, seeking the consulship as the next step in his political ascent, needed support from established leaders to overcome the resistance of conservative senators. The meeting itself was conducted with the discretion necessary for such sensitive political negotiations. No written records were kept, no witnesses were present beyond the three principals, and even the location was chosen to avoid the attention of political rivals. In the soft light of oil lamps, surrounded by the peaceful beauty of flowering plants and gentle fountains, these three men crafted an agreement that would dominate Roman politics for the next decade. The terms of their alliance were elegant in their simplicity. Caesar would receive support for his consular candidacy and, if successful, backing for legislation that would address Pompey's and Crassus's needs. Pompey would gain ratification of his eastern settlements and land distributions for his veteran soldiers. Crassus would obtain favorable treatment for the tax-collecting companies in which he had invested heavily. Each man would use his particular strengths, Caesar's political skills, Pompey's military reputation, and Crassus's financial resources to advance their common interests. The formation of this alliance, later known to historians as the First Triumvirate, represented a fundamental shift in the way Roman politics operated. Traditional patterns of senatorial debate and consensus building were replaced by the coordinated action of three individuals who possessed sufficient combined influence to override institutional opposition. While this arrangement would prove highly effective in achieving immediate objectives, it also marked the beginning of the end for the republican system that had governed Rome for centuries. Caesar's successful campaign for the consulship demonstrated the power of the new alliance. His colleague in office, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, found himself completely marginalized as Caesar pushed through the legislation promised to his partners. Pompey's veterans received their promised land grants, while Crassus's business associates secured favorable modifications to their tax-collecting contracts. Caesar's own position was strengthened by each success, establishing him as the alliance's most effective political operator. The personal relationships that developed among the three partners added complexity to their political arrangement. Caesar and Pompey, despite their different backgrounds and temperaments, developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect for each other's abilities. Their bond was strengthened by Caesar's decision to offer his daughter Julia in marriage to Pompey. Despite the significant age difference between the aging general and the young woman, Julia's wedding to Pompey was celebrated with all the magnificence appropriate to such a significant political alliance. Yet those who knew the family well could see that genuine affection quickly developed between the unlikely couple. Pompey, despite his fearsome reputation as a military commander, proved to be a gentle and devoted husband, while Julia's natural warmth and intelligence won his heart completely. Their love story would become one of the few bright chapters in the increasingly dark tale of Roman political conflict. The relationship between Caesar and Crassus was more complex, marked by both mutual utility and underlying competition. Crassus's vast wealth provided essential financial support for Caesar's political activities, while Caesar's growing influence offered Crassus access to power that money alone could not purchase. Yet both men harbored ambitions that would ultimately prove incompatible, sowing seeds of future conflict within their seemingly successful partnership. Caesar's consulship, empowered by his alliance with Pompey and Crassus, produced a remarkable series of legislative achievements. Beyond the measures that directly benefited his partners, he implemented reforms addressing land distribution, debt relief, and administrative efficiency that won him popularity among broad segments of Roman society. His ability to navigate complex political situations while maintaining focus on practical governance demonstrated the skills that would serve him throughout his career. The opposition that Caesar's consulship encountered from conservative senators led by Cato the Younger revealed the deep philosophical divisions that were tearing Roman society apart. Cato's faction viewed the triumviral alliance as a dangerous innovation that threatened traditional republican institutions, while Caesar and his supporters saw themselves as providing effective leadership in an age when old methods had proven inadequate to Rome's needs. The climax of Caesar's consular year came with his acquisition of an extraordinary command in Gaul, a position that would provide him with the opportunity to equal or surpass Pompey's military achievements. The Gallic command offered not just the prospect of military glory, but also access to the wealth and veteran loyalty that would be essential for future political success. In securing this appointment, the Triumviral Alliance demonstrated its ability to override senatorial opposition and reshape Roman policy according to its members' preferences. The evening before Caesar's departure for Gaul marked the end of one phase of his career and the beginning of another. In the familiar surroundings of his residence as Pontifex Maximus, surrounded by the symbols of religious authority he would retain throughout his Gallic campaigns, Caesar hosted a farewell dinner for his closest friends and political allies. The conversation was marked by excitement about future possibilities, tempered by awareness of the risks inherent in any major military undertaking. Julia's presence at this gathering added emotional depth to what might otherwise have been merely a political occasion. Her happiness in marriage to Pompey had strengthened the bonds between two of the triumvirs, while her evident pride in her father's achievements reflected the personal satisfaction that complemented Caesar's public success. The love between father and daughter, visible to all who observed them together, provided a humanizing element that softened Caesar's increasingly formidable political reputation. As the evening progressed and guests departed one by one, Caesar found himself alone with his thoughts in the quiet of his study. The scrolls and documents that surrounded him told the story of a remarkable year. Legislation passed, alliances formed, enemies defeated, and opportunities secured. Yet, beneath the satisfaction of achievement lay awareness that he was crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. The Gallic command represented both opportunity and danger on a scale unprecedented in Caesar's career. Success would establish him among Rome's greatest military leaders and provide the foundation for achieving his ultimate ambitions. Failure, however, would likely mean not just the end of his political career, but potentially his death at the hands of barbarian enemies or political rivals. The stakes could hardly have been higher. In the soft darkness before dawn, as Caesar completed his final preparations for departure, Rome slept peacefully under the protection of gods and traditions that had sustained her for centuries. The young man who had once served those traditions as Flamen Dialis was now embarking on adventures that would ultimately transform them beyond recognition. Yet, in this quiet moment, he remained simply a devoted father, preparing to leave his beloved daughter. A loyal Roman setting out to serve his city's interests, and a man of remarkable abilities answering destiny's call. Rest now, dear listener, in the knowledge that great achievements often begin with quiet conversations between people who recognize in each other the potential to change the world, and that even the most momentous decisions are ultimately made by human beings with hopes and fears much like our own. The morning mist that rose from the valleys of Gaul seemed to part before Caesar's advancing legions like curtains revealing a vast stage upon which history would unfold. It was the spring of 58 BCE. The newly appointed proconsul had arrived in his province with 4 veteran legions and ambitious plans that would transform both his own destiny and the fate of the Celtic peoples who called these fertile lands home. The Gaul that Caesar encountered was not the barbarian wilderness that many Romans imagined, but rather a complex tapestry of tribal kingdoms, each with its own customs, laws, and warrior traditions. The Helvetii, the Belgi, the Aedui, and dozens of other tribes had developed sophisticated societies marked by skilled craftsmanship, extensive trade networks, and a rich oral tradition that preserved their ancient wisdom in the songs of druids and bards. Caesar's first challenge came not from his own ambitions, but from the migrations of the Helvetii, Celtic tribes seeking to abandon their mountain homeland in favor of more fertile territories in western Gaul. Their planned movement would have disrupted the careful balance of power that Rome had established with friendly Gallic tribes, while creating opportunities for hostile peoples to threaten Roman interests. The situation demanded immediate attention, providing Caesar with a perfect justification for military action. The diplomatic negotiations that preceded the conflict revealed Caesar's growing sophistication in dealing with foreign peoples, rather than simply issuing ultimatums backed by military threats. He took time to understand Helvetii concerns and motivations, seeking solutions that might avoid unnecessary bloodshed while protecting Roman interests. The Helvetii chieftains who met with Caesar were impressed despite themselves by the Roman commander's courtesy and genuine interest in their tribal customs. He spoke to them not as barbarians to be conquered, but as fellow leaders facing difficult decisions about their people's welfare. When diplomacy ultimately failed and military action became necessary, both sides understood that war had come not from hatred, but from irreconcilable differences about territorial rights. The Battle of Bibracte, Caesar's first major engagement in Gaul, demonstrated the tactical innovations that would mark all his subsequent campaigns, rather than relying solely on the traditional Roman formation fighting that had served the legions well in previous wars. Caesar adapted his tactics to the specific challenges posed by Celtic warfare. The Gallic warriors, brave beyond question and skilled in individual combat, fought with a fierce intensity that initially tested even veteran Roman discipline. Caesar's personal leadership during the battle became legendary among his soldiers. When the Roman line wavered under the impact of the Helvetii charge, he seized a shield from a fallen legionnaire and placed himself in the front rank, his presence inspiring his men to renewed effort. This was not mere theatrical gesture, but genuine shared danger. As Caesar fought alongside his soldiers with sword and shield, his scarlet cloak making him a target for every enemy warrior who recognized the value of killing a Roman commander. The victory at Bibracte established Caesar's reputation among both his own forces and the Gallic tribes as a commander of exceptional ability. His treatment of the defeated Helvetii demonstrated the same combination of firmness and mercy that had characterized his Spanish campaigns. Rather than enslaving the entire population or demanding crushing indemnities, he allowed them to return to their original homeland under conditions that protected Roman interests while preserving their essential dignity. The administrative tasks that followed military victory revealed another dimension of Caesar's capabilities. He established supply depots, organized communication networks, and created the infrastructure necessary to support extended military operations in a foreign land. His attention to logistical details ensured that his soldiers remained well-fed and properly equipped, even in the remote regions where their campaigns would take them. Caesar's relationship with his soldiers evolved during these early Gallic campaigns into something unprecedented in Roman military history. The shared hardships of campaigning in unfamiliar territory, combined with Caesar's practice of sharing every danger and privation, created bonds of mutual loyalty that transcended the normal relationship between commander and troops. His men began to see him not just as their general, but as their champion and protector. The evening hours in Caesar's campaign tent were often devoted to correspondence with Rome. Carefully crafted dispatches that kept the Senate and people informed about his achievements, while maintaining the political support necessary for continued success. These reports, written in Caesar's elegant prose, later formed the basis for his famous commentaries on the Gallic Wars, literary masterpieces that combined military history with political advocacy. His letters to Julia and Pompey revealed the more personal side of the great commander. To his daughter, he wrote with tender concern about her health and happiness, sharing observations about the strange customs and beautiful landscapes he encountered in Gaul. His correspondence with Pompey combined genuine friendship with careful attention to their shared political interests, maintaining the alliance that remained crucial to both men's success. The wealth that began to flow from Caesar's Gallic victories provided the financial foundation for all his future political activities. Celtic gold and silver, captured in tribal treasuries and tribute payments, filled Roman wagons bound for Italy. This wealth served not just Caesar's personal needs, but also funded the generous bonuses he provided to his soldiers, binding them to his cause through both loyalty and self-interest. The cultural encounter between Roman and Celtic civilizations that unfolded during Caesar's campaigns proved more complex than either side had anticipated. Roman soldiers, initially dismissive of barbarian customs, gradually developed respect for Gallic courage, craftsmanship, and honor. Celtic warriors, while resenting Roman conquest, came to admire the discipline and organizational skills that made the legions so formidable. Caesar himself became genuinely fascinated by Celtic culture, learning enough of their languages to conduct negotiations without interpreters and studying their religious and legal traditions with scholarly interest. His writings about Gallic customs and institutions provide some of our most valuable insights into Celtic civilization, revealing a commander who saw his enemies as fellow human beings worthy of understanding and respect. The Druids, the learned class who served as judges, teachers, and priests among the Celtic peoples, presented Caesar with a particular challenge. Their influence extended across tribal boundaries, potentially providing a focus for unified resistance to Roman conquest. Yet Caesar recognized their genuine learning and social value, seeking to win their cooperation rather than simply destroying their influence. As Caesar's first year in Gaul drew to a close, he could look back with satisfaction on achievements that had exceeded even his ambitious expectations. The Helvetii threat had been eliminated, friendly tribes had been protected, and Roman authority had been established throughout a significant portion of Gallic territory. His soldiers had proven their worth in battle, while his own reputation as a commander had been firmly established. The quiet of winter quarters provided an opportunity for reflection on the magnitude of what had been accomplished and what remained to be achieved. Caesar understood that his initial victories, however impressive, represented only the beginning of what would likely prove a long and difficult struggle to establish permanent Roman control over all of Gaul. The Celtic peoples were numerous, brave, and skilled in warfare, while their familiarity with local terrain gave them significant advantages in any prolonged conflict. Yet, as Caesar reviewed his maps by lamplight in his winter headquarters, studying the complex geography of rivers, forests, tribal territories that lay before him, he felt confident that the foundations had been laid for ultimate success. His soldiers trusted his leadership absolutely, his supply lines remained secure, and his political position in Rome had been strengthened by news of his victories. The stage was set for achievements that would dwarf even these impressive beginnings. In the gentle quiet of evening, as snow began to fall softly outside his tent, Caesar composed his thoughts for the reports he would send to Rome. The year's campaigns had demonstrated that Gallic conquest was not just possible, but inevitable. Given sufficient time, resources, and determination, what remained was to execute the careful planning and tactical excellence necessary to achieve complete victory while minimizing the cost in Roman blood and treasure. Rest now, dear listener, in the peaceful knowledge that great enterprises often begin with small steps, and that even the mightiest achievements are built upon the foundation of careful preparation, loyal friendship, and the quiet courage to persist when others might falter. The spring sunshine filtering through the ancient forests of northern Gaul carried with it the promise of the most challenging campaign Caesar had yet undertaken. Word had reached his winter quarters that the Belgian tribes, the most warlike of all Gallic peoples according to Caesar's own assessment, were forming a great confederation to resist Roman expansion. The year 57 BCE would test every lesson learned during his initial successes and reveal whether Caesar's growing reputation as a commander could withstand the ultimate trial of Celtic warfare. The Belgi were indeed formidable opponents. Their warrior culture, honed by generations of conflict with Germanic tribes across the Rhine, unlike the more Romanized Gallic peoples of the south, they had maintained their ancient customs largely unchanged, viewing war not as a necessary evil, but as the highest expression of masculine virtue. Their chieftains commanded loyalty earned through personal prowess in battle, while their young men sought glory in raids and combat that would secure their places in tribal memory. Caesar's intelligence network, developed during his first year in Gaul, provided detailed information about the Belgian Confederation's strength and intentions. The alliance included the Bellovaci, Ambiani, Marine, and numerous smaller tribes, together capable of fielding armies that outnumbered. Caesar's forces by margins that would have deterred less confident commanders. Yet Caesar understood that numbers alone rarely determined the outcome of ancient battles. Training, discipline, and leadership often proved more decisive than raw courage and numerical superiority. The Roman advance into Belgian territory was conducted with the methodical precision that had become Caesar's trademark. His legions moved in carefully coordinated formations. Engineers preparing river crossings and fortified camps, while cavalry screens protected against surprise attacks. The logistical train that followed the fighting forces carried not just weapons and supplies, but also the tools and materials needed to construct the siege engines that might prove necessary in reducing Belgian strongholds. The first major encounter with Belgian forces demonstrated both the courage of Celtic warriors and the superior organization of Roman military methods. At the Sabas River, later known as the Sambre, Caesar's army faced a carefully planned ambush that nearly succeeded in destroying the Roman expedition entirely. The Nervi and their allies had studied Roman camping procedures and identified the moment of maximum vulnerability when the legions were constructing their daily fortifications. The attack came with stunning suddenness as Roman soldiers worked on their defenses, many having laid aside their weapons to assist with construction tasks. Celtic warriors emerged from the forest like a sudden storm, their war cries echoing across the river valley as they charged toward the partially completed Roman camp. For a terrifying moment, it seemed that Caesar's remarkable run of success was about to end in catastrophic defeat. Caesar's personal leadership during this crisis became one of the most famous incidents of his entire career. Racing from his headquarters tent toward the point of greatest danger, he seized weapons from fallen soldiers and threw himself into the desperate fighting that would determine his army's fate. His scarlet cloak streaming behind him, Caesar moved from one threatened section of the line to another, his presence inspiring his men to resist with a fury that matched their enemy's assault. The battle swayed back and forth with the intensity that marked the fiercest encounters of ancient warfare. Roman discipline and training gradually began to tell against Celtic courage and individual skill. But the outcome remained in doubt until the arrival of Caesar's 10th Legion from the rear of the column tilted the balance decisively in Rome's favor. The Nervi, despite suffering crushing losses, fought with legendary determination until virtually all their warriors lay dead upon the field. Caesar's treatment of the Nervi survivors demonstrated the political wisdom that complemented his military skills. Rather than enslaving the remnants of the tribe or seizing all their territory, he allowed them to retain their homeland under conditions that acknowledged Roman supremacy while preserving their dignity. This merciful policy encouraged other Belgian tribes to surrender rather than face the destruction that awaited those who fought to the bitter end. The submission of the Bellovaci, the most powerful of the Belgian confederates, marked the effective end of organized resistance in northern Gaul. Their chieftains, awed by reports of Roman victories and impressed by Caesar's reputation for fair dealing with defeated enemies, chose negotiation over hopeless warfare. The terms Caesar offered were generous enough to preserve tribal honor while establishing Roman authority throughout the region. The wealth acquired during the Belgian campaigns exceeded even the rich spoils of Caesar's earlier victories. Celtic goldwork, skillfully crafted weapons, and thousands of prisoners destined for the slave markets of Rome filled wagon trains bound for Italy. More importantly, for Caesar's long-term goals. The veteran soldiers who had shared in these victories became increasingly devoted to their commander, understanding that their own fortunes were linked to his continued success. The administrative challenges of governing newly conquered Belgian territories required the same careful attention to detail that Caesar brought to military operations. He appointed friendly chieftains to govern their tribes under Roman oversight, established trade routes that would bind the region to the Roman economy, began the process of cultural integration that would eventually transform these Celtic warriors into Roman citizens. Caesar's growing understanding of Celtic society enabled him to work more effectively with tribal leaders who chose cooperation over resistance. He learned to navigate the complex web of personal relationships, ancient feuds, and traditional obligations that governed Belgian politics, using this knowledge to prevent the formation of new anti-Roman alliances. His respectful treatment of Druidic traditions, despite their potential for encouraging resistance, won him unexpected support from influential religious leaders. The letters Caesar wrote to Rome during the Belgian campaigns revealed his growing confidence in the ultimate success of his Gallic enterprise. Reports to the Senate emphasized the defensive nature of his operations, portraying Roman expansion as necessary to protect existing provinces from barbarian threats. Private correspondence with his triumviral partners focused on the wealth and military resources that Gallic conquest was providing for their shared political objectives. His communications with Julia and Pompey carried special warmth during this period, as news from Rome brought reports of their continued happiness together. Julia's letters to her father, filled with affection and pride in his achievements, provided emotional sustenance during the lonely months of campaigning. Pompey's friendship, expressed through both personal notes and public support in Roman political circles, remained crucial to Caesar's ability to maintain his extraordinary command. The cultural exchange that continued between Romans and Celts during the Belgian campaigns produced unexpected benefits for both sides. Roman soldiers learned Celtic techniques for winter warfare and forest fighting, while Belgian craftsmen absorbed Roman methods of fortification and siege warfare. The gradual development of hybrid military practices would prove valuable in Caesar's subsequent campaigns against more distant enemies. As winter approached and the campaigning season drew to a close, Caesar could reflect with satisfaction on achievements that had surpassed even his ambitious expectations. The Belgian Confederation had been broken. Roman authority had been established throughout northern Gaul, and his own reputation as a military commander now rivaled that of Pompey himself. The foundation had been laid for the complete conquest of Gaul, though greater challenges still lay ahead. The quiet of winter quarters provided an opportunity for the careful planning that had made Caesar's successes possible. Maps were updated to reflect new territorial acquisitions. Supply routes were established to support future operations. Okay, and diplomatic contacts were maintained with tribes that remained independent. The methodical preparation that characterized Caesar's approach to warfare continued even during periods of apparent inactivity. In the gentle evening hours, when official business was complete, Caesar often walked alone through his winter camp, observing the daily life of his soldiers and reflecting on the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The men who had followed him through 2 years of Gallic warfare had been transformed from ordinary legionnaires into veterans of extraordinary skill and loyalty. Their trust in his leadership had become absolute, creating a military instrument capable of achieving objectives that at once seemed impossible. Rest now, gentle listener, in the understanding that great victories are often won not in single battles, but through the patient accumulation of smaller successes, and that the greatest commanders are those who inspire their followers to achieve more than they ever believed possible. The salt spray of the Atlantic Ocean kissed Caesar's weathered face as he stood upon the shores of Gaul, gazing across waters that marked the very edge of the known world. It was the summer of 55 BCE. The Roman commander was preparing for an expedition that would have seemed impossible to previous generations, a crossing to the mysterious island of Britannia, to the painted warriors whom even the fierce Gauls regarded with superstitious awe. The decision to invade Britain had grown from practical military considerations rather than mere adventurous ambition. British tribes had provided assistance to their Gallic cousins during Caesar's campaigns, sending warriors and supplies across the narrow channel that separated their island from the continent. More troubling still, British Druids traveled freely throughout Gaul, their religious authority potentially providing a rallying point for renewed resistance to Roman rule. Caesar's preparations for the British expedition demonstrated the meticulous planning that characterized all his military endeavors. Months were spent gathering intelligence about British geography, tribal customs, and military capabilities from Gallic traders who regularly crossed the channel. Special transport ships were designed and constructed to handle the unique challenges of amphibious warfare, while additional forces were recruited and trained for operations in unfamiliar terrain. The engineering challenges posed by the British invasion tested Roman military technology to its limits. The ships needed to carry not just soldiers, but also horses, artillery, and the supplies necessary for extended operations on foreign shores. Caesar's engineers, drawing upon centuries of Roman innovation in construction and design, created vessels that combined the seaworthiness needed for open ocean navigation with the shallow draft required for beach landings. As the invasion fleet assembled in the harbors of northern Gaul, Caesar faced opposition from an unexpected quarter: his own soldiers, the veteran legionnaires who had followed him through years of successful campaigning, balked at the prospect of sailing beyond the world's edge to fight mythical enemies in a land shrouded in perpetual mist. Ancient superstitions about sea monsters and the realm of the dead proved more powerful than military discipline or personal loyalty to their beloved commander. Caesar's response to this crisis of confidence revealed the depth of his understanding of human nature and the art of leadership. Rather than relying on threats or appeals to duty, he addressed his soldiers' fears directly, sharing with them the intelligence he had gathered about British geography and customs. He spoke of Britain not as a supernatural realm, but as another land inhabited by men much like themselves, possessed of courage and skill, but vulnerable to Roman discipline and organization. The address that Caesar delivered to his assembled legions before embarkation became one of the most famous speeches of his career. Standing before his men in the pre-dawn darkness, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ranks, he spoke of the honor that would be theirs as the first Romans to set foot on British soil. He reminded them of their previous victories, their proven superiority over Gallic warriors, and the wealth that awaited those brave enough to seize new opportunities for glory. "We have conquered the forests of Germania," Caesar declared, his words echoing off the ships that bobbed at anchor nearby. "We have broken the Belgian Confederation and brought peace to all of Gaul. Now we shall carry Roman eagles beyond the ocean itself, to lands where no Roman foot has ever trod. Your children's children will speak with the pride of this day, when their ancestors sailed beyond the world's edge to extend the dominion of Rome to the very limits of creation." The crossing itself proved treacherous despite careful planning and favorable weather. The tidal currents of the English Channel, more powerful than anything Caesar's men had previously encountered, carried the invasion fleet far from its intended landing site. British warriors, alerted by signal fires to the approaching danger, gathered in strength along the coastline, their painted bodies and wild war cries creating an intimidating spectacle for Romans unused to such alien customs. The first landing on British shores required all of Caesar's tactical skill and personal courage. The Roman ships, too large for the shallow coastal waters, were forced to anchor offshore while soldiers waded through surf made treacherous by enemy javelins and the unfamiliar tidal conditions. His men hesitated at the water's edge, awed by the strangeness of their situation. Caesar once again provided the personal leadership that had become his trademark. The standard-bearer of the 10th Legion, Caesar's favorite unit, provided the inspiration that broke the deadlock. Leaping from his ship into the surf, he called upon his comrades to follow him or see their sacred eagles dishonored. The sight of their beloved standard advancing toward shore galvanized the hesitating Romans, who rushed forward with a battle cry that echoed across the British coastline. The landing was secured through Roman discipline and the shock value of their unexpected arrival. The British resistance that Caesar encountered revealed a warrior culture as sophisticated as any he had previously faced. The Britons fought from horse-drawn chariots with a skill that recalled the heroic age described in Homer's verses. While their use of cavalry and coordinated infantry attacks demonstrated military abilities that commanded respect. Their painted bodies and strange battle cries were not mere barbarism, but calculated, psychological warfare designed to unnerve their enemies. Caesar's 2 expeditions to Britain, separated by a year of preparation and planning, established Roman prestige throughout the Celtic world while providing valuable intelligence about the island's resources and vulnerabilities, though permanent conquest would await future generations. Caesar's campaigns demonstrated Roman capability to project power across seemingly impossible barriers, a lesson that was not lost on potential enemies throughout the empire. The wealth acquired during the British expeditions, while less than some had hoped, included pearls from British rivers and slaves whose exotic appearance made them particularly valuable in Roman markets. More importantly, the psychological impact of Caesar's achievement enhanced his reputation throughout the Roman world. He had literally sailed beyond the edge of the known world and returned with proof of Roman superiority over the most distant barbarian peoples. The cultural exchange that resulted from Caesar's British campaigns proved mutually beneficial despite their limited duration. Roman soldiers learned new techniques for chariot warfare and horse management, while British craftsmen absorbed Roman methods of metalworking and construction. The seeds of eventual Romanization were planted during these brief encounters, though they would not bear full fruit for another century. Caesar's accounts of British customs and geography, included in his later commentaries, provided Roman readers with their first authoritative description of the mysterious island. His observations about British Druids, tribal organization, and agricultural practices revealed a civilization that, while different from Mediterranean norms, possessed its own sophisticated traditions and accomplishments. The return voyages to Gaul were marked by storms that tested both Roman seamanship and divine favor. Several ships were lost to winds and waves that seemed determined to prevent Roman departure from British shores, while others were driven far from their intended course before reaching safety. Caesar's own vessel barely survived encounters with weather that reminded all aboard of their mortality and the limits of human ambition. As news of Caesar's British expeditions spread throughout the Roman world, the public response exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. Citizens who had grown accustomed to reports of Gallic victories found themselves amazed by their commander's audacity in challenging the ocean itself. Poets composed verses celebrating Caesar's achievement, while artists created works depicting Roman eagles triumphant on distant shores. The political impact of the British campaigns proved equally significant. Caesar's enemies in Rome found it difficult to criticize expeditions that had brought unprecedented glory to Roman arms, while his supporters could point to achievements that placed their leader among the greatest figures in Roman history. The triumviral alliance was strengthened by success that enhanced the prestige of all its members. In the quiet of evening, as Caesar reviewed the maps and reports from his British expeditions, he could reflect with satisfaction on achievements that had exceeded the boldest dreams of his youth. He had become the first Roman to cross the ocean, to set foot on British soil, and to return with proof of victories won in lands that had existed only in legend. The boy who had once wept before Alexander's statue now commanded achievements that rivaled those of the great Macedonian himself. The gentle sounds of his Gallic headquarters settling into nighttime rest reminded Caesar that even the most extraordinary accomplishments were built upon foundations of careful planning, loyal friendship, and the daily attention to detail that sustained military excellence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight belonged to quiet satisfaction and the peaceful knowledge that duty had been faithfully performed. Rest now, dear listener, in the understanding that the greatest adventures often begin with a single step into the unknown, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to proceed despite it. Guided by duty and the love of those who depend upon our strength, the autumn mist that shrouded the hills of central Gaul carried with it whispers of rebellion that would test every skill Caesar had developed during his years of conquest. It was 52 BCE, and the Celtic peoples, after enduring Roman domination with growing resentment, had finally found a leader capable of uniting their fractious tribes against their common enemy. Vercingetorix, a young Arverni chieftain whose name meant great king of warriors, was rallying all of Gaul to throw off the Roman yoke in what would become the greatest challenge of Caesar's military career. The rebellion began not with dramatic battles, but with the massacre of Roman merchants and settlers in the town of Cinnabome, modern-day Orleans. The coordinated nature of these attacks, occurring simultaneously across hundreds of miles of territory, revealed a level of organization that had been absent from previous Gallic resistance. Caesar, wintering in Cisalpine Gaul when news of the uprising reached him, immediately understood that he faced not merely another tribal revolt, but a genuine war of national liberation. Vercingetorix himself was a figure who commanded respect even from his Roman enemies. Young, charismatic, and possessed of genuine military ability, he represented a new generation of Celtic leadership that had learned from previous failures against Roman power. Unlike earlier war chiefs who had relied solely on traditional methods, Vercingetorix understood the importance of avoiding pitched battles where Roman discipline gave the legions decisive advantages. The strategy that Vercingetorix employed against Caesar was sophisticated in its simplicity. Rather than meeting Roman forces in direct confrontation, he would deny them supplies through scorched earth tactics, while using mobile forces to harass their communications and supply lines. Every town, every granary, every resource that might benefit the Romans was to be destroyed before Caesar's legions could seize them. Caesar's response to this unprecedented challenge demonstrated the strategic flexibility that marked his greatest achievements. Recognizing that traditional campaigning methods would prove inadequate against such tactics, he adapted his approach to emphasize speed of movement and the ability to live off hostile territory. His soldiers, already renowned for their discipline and endurance, would be tested as never before in campaigns that stretched their capabilities to the breaking point. The siege of Gergovia, Vercingetorix's stronghold in the Arverni homeland, marked the first significant setback of Caesar's Gallic career. The hilltop fortress, protected by steep slopes and defended by warriors fighting for their ancestral homes, proved impossible to take by direct assault. After weeks of futile attacks that cost numerous Roman lives, Caesar was forced to withdraw, his first clear defeat in years of continuous warfare. The psychological impact of this failure rippled throughout Gaul like ripples from a stone cast into still water. Tribes that had accepted Roman authority with resignation began to reconsider their positions. Neutral peoples were encouraged to join Vercingetorix's growing confederation. Caesar found himself in the unfamiliar position of fighting not his military enemies, but also the collapse of political alliances that had taken years to construct. Yet, even in retreat, Caesar demonstrated the qualities that had made him one of history's great commanders. The withdrawal from Gergovia was conducted with such skill that Roman casualties were minimized, while morale was preserved through the careful distribution of responsibility for the setback. Caesar himself accepted full blame for the strategic miscalculation, earning increased loyalty from soldiers who might otherwise have questioned his judgment. The campaign that followed Caesar's withdrawal from Gergovia showcased both commanders at their most brilliant. Vercingetorix, seeking to capitalize on his victory, gathered the largest Gallic army ever assembled and prepared for the decisive battle that would either secure Celtic independence or crush it forever. Caesar, understanding that his entire position in Gaul hung in the balance, marshaled every resource at his disposal for what would become the climactic engagement of the entire war. The fortress of Alesia, perched on its seemingly impregnable plateau, became the stage for one of the most famous sieges in military history. Vercingetorix, confident in the strength of his position and the size of his army, withdrew to this stronghold, expecting Caesar to exhaust his forces in futile assaults against its walls. Instead, he found himself facing an enemy who possessed the patience and engineering skill to turn Alesia from a refuge into a trap. Caesar's decision to surround Alesia with a double line of fortifications, one facing the city and another facing outward to repel relief forces, represented one of the most audacious military undertakings of the ancient world. The engineering challenges were enormous, requiring the construction of miles of walls, ditches, and obstacles in hostile territory, while under constant threat of attack from desperate enemies. The Roman soldiers who labored on these fortifications worked with the knowledge that their own survival depended on the success of their efforts. Every stake driven into the ground, every ditch excavated, every barrier constructed brought them closer to victory or death. Caesar himself supervised the work, his presence among the toiling legionnaires, a constant reminder that their commander shared their dangers and their determination. The arrival of the Gallic relief army, estimated at over 250,000 warriors drawn from tribes throughout Celtic Europe, created a situation unique in Roman military history. Caesar's forces, numbering perhaps 70,000 men, found themselves trapped between the defenders of Alesia and a relief force that outnumbered them by nearly 4-1. The siege had become a double siege, with Romans simultaneously besieging and besieged. The battle that determined the fate of Gaul unfolded with the complex choreography of ancient warfare at its most sophisticated. Attacks came from multiple directions as Gallic forces sought to coordinate their efforts to break through Roman fortifications. The sound of battle, clashing weapons, war cries, and the crash of siege engines echoed across the countryside for days as the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. Caesar's personal leadership during the climactic moments of the Battle of Alesia became the stuff of legend. When Roman lines wavered under the pressure of simultaneous attacks from within and without, Caesar donned his scarlet cloak and led a cavalry charge that struck the Gallic relief army at its most vulnerable moment. Caesar's appearance on the battlefield, easily recognizable to friend and foe alike, inspired his soldiers to superhuman efforts while spreading panic among enemies who had thought victory within their grasp. The collapse of Gallic resistance came with stunning suddenness. The relief army, caught between Caesar's cavalry and the Roman fortifications, disintegrated as tribal contingents fled to protect their own territories. Within Alesia, Vercingetorix recognized that further resistance would only bring destruction upon his people. In an act of supreme personal courage, he chose surrender to save those who had trusted him with their lives. The scene of Vercingetorix's surrender to Caesar was conducted with the dignity appropriate to the meeting of two great commanders. The young Gallic chief, dressed in his finest armor and riding his best horse, presented himself at Caesar's headquarters with the bearing of a king rather than a defeated rebel. Caesar, recognizing the courage required for such an act, received his surrender with the respect due to a worthy opponent. The conversations between Caesar and Vercingetorix during the latter's captivity revealed the complex relationship between conqueror and conquered in the ancient world. Despite their conflict, both men had developed mutual respect based on their recognition of each other's abilities and integrity. Vercingetorix's dignity in defeat enhanced rather than diminished his reputation, while Caesar's fair treatment of his captive demonstrated the clemency that would become one of his defining characteristics. The aftermath of Alesia saw the final pacification of Gaul through a combination of military pressure and political accommodation. The tribes that had supported Vercingetorix were treated with varying degrees of severity, depending on their previous relations with Rome. But Caesar's general policy emphasized reconciliation rather than revenge. The goal was not merely conquest, but integration, the transformation of Celtic Gaul into a productive Roman province. The wealth that flowed from Caesar's completed conquest of Gaul exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Celtic gold and silver, accumulated over centuries in tribal treasuries, filled Roman wagons bound for Italy. More importantly, the hundreds of thousands of prisoners taken during the Gallic Wars provided the slave labor that would fuel Roman economic expansion for generations to come. As Caesar settled into winter quarters following his victory at Alesia, he could reflect upon achievements that had transformed him from a promising politician into one of history's great military commanders. The Gaul that had taken 8 years to conquer was now Roman, its incorporation into the empire adding vast territories and populations to Roman control while providing the foundation for Caesar's own rise to supreme power. In the quiet of evening, as reports were written and plans made for the administrative challenges of governing newly conquered territories, Caesar's thoughts often turned to the cost of his victories. Hundreds of thousands had died in the Gallic Wars. Entire peoples had been enslaved or displaced, and ancient Celtic civilization had been forever altered by Roman conquest. The burden of such responsibility weighed heavily, even on shoulders as strong as Caesar's. Rest now, gentle listener, in the knowledge that even the greatest victories carry with them the weight of what was lost in their winning. And that true greatness lies not in conquest alone, but in the wisdom to use power justly, and the compassion to remember that all men, friend and foe alike, share our common humanity. The gentle murmur of flowing water seemed unusually loud in the pre-dawn darkness as Caesar stood beside the banks of the Rubicon, that modest stream which marked the boundary between his Gallic province and Italy proper. It was January 10th, 49 BCE, and the man who had spent nearly a decade conquering Gaul now faced the most momentous decision of his extraordinary life. Behind him stood a single legion of devoted soldiers, while ahead lay either supreme power or certain death. There could be no middle ground. The events that had brought Caesar to this fateful riverbank stretched back through months of increasingly bitter political conflict in Rome. His enemies in the Senate, led by Cato the Younger and backed by his former ally Pompey, had demanded that he surrendered his military command and return to Rome as a private citizen to stand trial for alleged irregularities during his consulship. Such a surrender would have meant not only the end of his political career, but likely exile or execution at the hands of those who had never forgiven his rise to prominence. Caesar's attempts to negotiate a peaceful resolution had been rebuffed with the kind of rigid legalism that characterized his opponents' approach to republican governance. They offered no compromise, no recognition of his services to Rome, no acknowledgement of the unprecedented expansion of Roman power and wealth that his Gallic conquests had achieved. The choice they presented was simple: submit to humiliation or be declared an enemy of the state. The personal cost of the conflict weighed heavily upon Caesar's mind as he contemplated crossing the stream that would make him an outlaw in the eyes of Roman law. His beloved daughter, Julia, had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, her death severing the strongest bond between Caesar and Pompey, while removing the one person whose love might have guided both men away from this catastrophic collision. Her grave in Rome would now be beyond his reach, another price of the choice he was about to make. The soldiers who waited behind Caesar in the darkness understood the magnitude of the moment they were witnessing. These were veterans of countless battles, men who had followed their commander through the forests of Gaul and across the waters to Britain. Their loyalty to Caesar was absolute, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect that had developed over years of campaigning together. Yet even they felt the weight of taking arms against Rome itself. Caesar's meditation beside the Rubicon was interrupted by the arrival of a mysterious figure who seemed to materialize from the river mist like a messenger from the gods themselves. Some who witnessed the encounter claimed it was a shepherd, others a wandering musician, but all agreed that the stranger was of unusual height and bearing. Taking a trumpet from one of the Roman soldiers, he sounded a battle call that echoed across the water before plunging into the stream and disappearing into the Italian darkness. Whether this apparition was divine intervention, psychological manifestation, or mere coincidence, its effect upon Caesar was decisive. Alia iacta est, he declared to his assembled officers. The die is cast. With these words, he spurred his horse into the shallow waters of the Rubicon, followed by his soldiers in a column that would reshape the destiny of the Western world. The crossing itself was accomplished in the quiet efficiency that marked all of Caesar's military movements. No trumpets sounded, no standards were displayed, no speeches were made to announce their illegal entry into Italy. The only sounds were the gentle splash of horses and men moving through water and the whispered commands that maintained unit cohesion in the darkness. By dawn, Caesar's entire force had crossed the boundary between lawful command and revolutionary action. The first Italian town to fall under Caesar's control was tiny Ariminum, modern Rimini, which opened its gates without resistance when approached by his advance guard. The local magistrates, faced with the reality of Caesar's presence rather than distant reports of senatorial declarations, chose accommodation over hopeless defiance. Their decision established a pattern that would be repeated throughout Italy as communities weighed Caesar's reputation for clemency against uncertain support from his enemies. Caesar's proclamation to the people of Italy, issued from Ariminum in the days following his crossing, revealed the political sophistication that complemented his military skills. Rather than presenting himself as a conqueror or revolutionary, he portrayed his actions as defensive measures taken by a loyal Roman citizen forced to protect himself against illegal persecution. His enemies, he claimed, were the true threats to Republican traditions, seeking to destroy him through judicial murder and political manipulation. The speed of Caesar's advance through northern Italy caught his opponents completely unprepared. Town after town opened its gates to his approach, while local populations greeted the conquering hero of Gaul with enthusiasm rather than resistance. The wealth and veterans' bonuses that Caesar had distributed during his years of provincial command now paid political dividends as communities that had benefited from his generosity chose his side in the growing conflict. Pompey's response to Caesar's invasion demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses that had marked his illustrious career. His strategic decision to withdraw from Rome and concentrate his forces in southern Italy was militarily sound, allowing him to utilize his superior naval resources while avoiding premature battles against Caesar's veteran legions. Yet the psychological impact of abandoning the capital to his rival proved devastating. 2. Senatorial morale and public confidence. The meeting between Caesar and the fleeing senators at Brundisium. Modern Brindisi provided a final opportunity for negotiated settlement that both sides ultimately rejected. Caesar's offers of clemency and power sharing were dismissed as insufficient by men who saw compromise with the declared enemy of the state as betrayal of their republican principles. Pompey's supporters chose exile and continued resistance over accommodation with what they viewed as illegal tyranny. Caesar's capture of Rome itself was accomplished without bloodshed. Okay. The eternal city opening its gates to the man who had once served as its high priest. The temples and public buildings that had witnessed his rise from ambitious young politician to supreme commander now welcomed him as master of the Roman world. Yet Caesar's behavior during his brief stay in the capital demonstrated the restraint that would become one of his most notable characteristics as dictator. The treasury of Rome, housed in the temple of Saturn and protected by ancient law and religious tradition, presented Caesar with both opportunity and moral challenge. His enemies had departed with much of the state's movable wealth, leaving him desperately short of the funds needed to pay his soldiers and finance continued operations. When the tribune who guarded the treasury doors cited constitutional law in refusing him access, Caesar's response was characteristically direct. "Arms and laws do not flourish together," he declared, but he ordered that no harm come to officials who were merely performing their duties. The wealth seized from the Roman treasury provided the financial foundation for Caesar's subsequent campaigns. But more importantly, it demonstrated to potential supporters throughout the Mediterranean world that Caesar possessed the resources necessary for ultimate victory. Ancient warfare was as much about perceived strength as actual military capability, and Caesar's control of Rome's traditional wealth sent a powerful message about the likely outcome of the civil war. Caesar's decision to pursue Pompey to Spain rather than immediately following him to the eastern Mediterranean revealed the strategic thinking that had made his Gallic campaigns so successful. By eliminating Pompey's Spanish legions first, Caesar would secure his rear and prevent the formation of a two-front war that might prove impossible to win. The famous declaration that he was going to fight an army without a leader before fighting a leader without an army captured both his strategic logic and his characteristic wit. The Spanish campaign that followed demonstrated Caesar's ability to adapt his tactical methods to new challenges and opponents. Pompey's legions in Spain were commanded by experienced generals and composed largely of veteran soldiers who matched Caesar's own troops in training and equipment. The battles of Ilerda and Dyrrhachium would test Caesar's military skills against opponents who understood Roman methods as thoroughly as he did. The siege of Massilia, modern Marseille, provided a parallel drama to the main Spanish campaign, as Caesar's forces confronted one of the few cities that chose to resist his advance. The ancient Greek colony's decision to support Pompey was based on centuries-old ties of friendship and mutual benefit. But their resistance also reflected broader Mediterranean concerns about Caesar's ultimate intentions. The siege demonstrated both Caesar's military capabilities and his political moderation, as the city was eventually allowed to surrender on favorable terms. Personal correspondence from this period reveals Caesar's emotional state as he grappled with the reality of civil war against former friends and colleagues. Letters to his remaining supporters in Rome. Combined practical discussions of political strategy with genuine anguish about the breakdown of republican institutions. His relationship with Cleopatra, which began during his later Egyptian campaign, provided emotional solace during this period of unprecedented stress and isolation. The loyalty of Caesar's soldiers during the early stages of the Civil War proved as crucial, to his success as their military effectiveness had been in Gaul. These veterans understood that their own futures were inextricably linked to their commander's fate. Defeat would mean not only death in battle, but also the loss of promised land grants and retirement bonuses. Their devotion to Caesar transcended mere military discipline to become something approaching religious dedication. Caesar's treatment of captured enemies during the Civil War established precedents that would influence Roman political culture for generations to come. Rather than executing prisoners or confiscating their property according to traditional practice, he offered clemency to all who would accept it and pardons to those who had opposed him. This policy of mercy, while strategically motivated, also reflected genuine moral convictions about the proper conduct of Romans toward fellow citizens. The administrative challenges of governing territories conquered during the Civil War required skills different from those needed for military command. Caesar had to balance the demands of his supporters for rewards and offices against the need to maintain stability and prevent economic collapse. His solutions often involved innovative legal and financial measures that stretched traditional republican institutions to their breaking point. As news of Caesar's victories spread throughout the Mediterranean world, the political landscape began to shift in his favor. Client kings and allied cities calculated that their interests lay with the victor rather than the vanquished, while neutral parties sought accommodation with what appeared to be the winning side. The momentum of success became self-reinforcing as each victory brought new allies and resources for future campaigns. The winter months following Caesar's initial successes provided opportunities for reflection on the magnitude of what had been accomplished and what remained to be achieved. The young man who had once wept before Alexander's statue had now surpassed even the Macedonians' achievements, conquering not just foreign enemies, but the Roman Republic itself. Yet the cost of such success weighed heavily on his conscience during quiet moments, when the demands of command allowed for personal contemplation. In the gentle hours before dawn, as Caesar reviewed reports and planned future operations from his temporary headquarters in captured cities, the full responsibility of his position settled upon him like a heavy cloak. He had become what no Roman before him had ever been, the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world. The question that haunted his solitude was whether such power could be used wisely, and whether the institutions of Rome could survive the transformation that his victory had made inevitable. Rest now, dear listener, in the knowledge that some decisions, once made, cannot be unmade, and that those who seize destiny must be prepared to bear the full weight of the consequences, both glorious and terrible, that flow from their choices. The golden light of Egyptian sunset painted the waters of Alexandria's great harbor, as Caesar stood upon the palace balcony, surveying an empire that now stretched from Britain's misty shores to the cataracts of the Nile. It was 47 BCE, and a man who had crossed the Rubicon as a desperate exile had become the undisputed master of the Roman world. Yet, with ultimate victory came challenges that no amount of military genius could fully resolve. The task of governing a vast empire while healing the wounds of civil war. The defeat of Pompey at Pharsalus had marked the effective end of organized republican resistance, though pockets of opposition remained in Africa and Spain. Caesar's clemency toward defeated enemies had become legendary throughout the Mediterranean. His former opponents found themselves not only pardoned, but often restored to positions of honor and responsibility. This policy of reconciliation, while politically astute, also created ongoing tensions with Caesar's supporters who expected harsher treatment of those who had opposed their leader. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra, the brilliant and ambitious queen of Egypt, added both personal happiness and political complexity to his position. Their love affair, which had begun during the Alexandrian War, represented more than mere romantic attachment. It was a political alliance between the heir of the pharaohs and the new master of Rome. Together, they envisioned a Hellenistic Roman synthesis that might unite East and West under enlightened monarchical rule. The birth of Caesarion, Caesar's son, with Cleopatra, brought profound joy to a man who had lost so much during the civil wars. In the child's innocent laughter and curious eyes, Caesar found respite from the burdens of rule and glimpses of a future that might transcend the bitter divisions of his own generation. The palace gardens of Alexandria, where father and son walked together in the gentle Egyptian evenings, became an oasis of domestic tranquility amid the storm of imperial responsibilities. Yet even in these moments of personal happiness, Caesar remained acutely aware of the challenges facing his regime. The Roman Republic's institutions, designed for governing a city-state, had proven inadequate for administering a Mediterranean empire. New forms of government were needed, but their creation risked destroying the very traditions that gave Roman civilization its strength and identity. The balance between innovation and conservation required wisdom that no individual, however gifted, could possess in full measure. Caesar's administrative reforms during his brief periods in Rome demonstrated both the scope of his vision and the practical difficulties of implementation. The calendar reform that bears his name solved the chronic problem of seasonal drift that had plagued Roman civic life for generations. The expansion of citizenship to include Gauls and other provincials began the transformation of Rome from an Italian republic to a truly Mediterranean empire. Public works projects provided employment while beautifying the capital that would serve as the center of his new order. The opposition that Caesar faced from traditional republican elements reflected more than mere political disagreement. It represented a fundamental conflict between competing visions of Roman identity. His enemies saw in his reforms the destruction of ancestral customs and the reduction of free citizens to subjects of an Oriental despot. Caesar himself believed that Roman institutions must evolve to meet new challenges or risk collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. The conspiracy that formed against Caesar's life brought together men of diverse backgrounds, united by shared conviction that his assassination was necessary to save Roman liberty. Marcus Brutus, whose mother had been Caesar's lover and who was rumored to be his son, struggled with conflicting loyalties that tore at his soul. Caius Cassius, driven by philosophical conviction and personal ambition, provided the organizational skills that transformed Republican sentiment into concrete action. Caesar's awareness of the growing danger to his life was evident in his private conversations and public behavior during his final months. Friends and soothsayers warned of plots against him, while omens and portents seemed to multiply with each passing day. Yet Caesar's response was characteristic. He dismissed his bodyguard and continued to appear in public, declaring that death held no terrors for one who had lived fully and achieved greatness. The relationship between Caesar and Brutus during these final months carried particular poignancy for both men. Caesar's affection for the younger man was evident in his efforts to include him in important decisions and honor him with significant responsibilities. Brutus, torn between gratitude for Caesar's favor and conviction that duty required his participation in the conspiracy, suffered agonies of conscience that marked him visibly to careful observers. The Ides of March dawned with unusual atmospheric disturbances that superstitious Romans interpreted as divine warnings about the day's events. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, troubled by nightmares and fearful omens, begged him to remain at home rather than attend the Senate meeting where his fate awaited. For a moment, Caesar wavered, his love for his wife competing with his sense of public duty and his unwillingness to appear governed by feminine fears. The scene in the Senate House on that fateful day has been recounted countless times, yet its essential drama remains undimmed by repetition. Caesar entered the chamber expecting to conduct routine business, perhaps discussion of the Parthian campaign he was planning for the following year. Instead, he found himself surrounded by men whose daggers transformed the sacred space of Roman governance into a slaughterhouse. The 23 wounds that ended Caesar's life were inflicted by senators who believed they were saving the Republic from tyranny. Yet their victims' final words, according to some accounts, were not of anger or despair, but of profound personal betrayal. E tu, Brute, you too, Brutus. In that moment of recognition, the personal tragedy overshadowed the political drama. Caesar understood that those he had loved had chosen duty over affection. Caesar's death at the foot of Pompey's statue carried symbolic weight that was not lost on contemporary observers. The man who had defeated the great general in civil war died beside the marbled image of his former friend and rival. Their earthly competition ended in the democracy of death that claims all mortals, regardless of their achievements or ambitions. The immediate aftermath of the assassination revealed the conspirators' failure to plan beyond the act itself. Having eliminated Caesar, they had no coherent vision for governing the empire he had created, or healing the divisions his death would inevitably deepen. Their assumption that the Republic would automatically revive with the dictator's removal proved tragically naive. The deity as new strongmen emerged to contest for the power that Caesar's death had left vacant. Mark Antony's funeral oration was delivered over Caesar's bloodied corpse in the forum where the dictator had achieved so many triumphs, transformed the political landscape overnight. The reading of Caesar's will, which left generous bequests to the Roman people and opened his gardens for public enjoyment, reminded citizens of their benefactor's generosity while highlighting the ingratitude of his assassins. The appearance of the comet that Romans called the Julian star in the weeks following Caesar's death seemed to confirm divine displeasure with those who had shed his blood. Popular religion interpreted the celestial phenomenon as proof that Caesar had been received among the gods, a belief that his adopted heir Octavian would skillfully exploit in his rise to power. Caesar's literary legacy, preserved in his commentaries on the Gallic and civil wars, provided future generations with invaluable insights into both his military methods and his political thinking. Written with the elegant clarity that marked all his communications, these works combined historical narrative with subtle self-justification, presenting Caesar's perspective on the events that had brought him to supreme power. The transformation of Caesar from historical figure to literary and cultural icon began almost immediately after his death. Poets, playwrights, and historians found in his story themes that resonated across centuries: the corruption of power, the conflict between personal ambition and public duty, the tragic consequences of political extremism. His name became synonymous with imperial authority, surviving in the titles Kaiser and Tsar long after the Roman Empire itself had crumbled. In the quiet moments before dawn on that final March morning, as Caesar prepared for what he did not know would be his last day, the weight of all his achievements and failures rested upon shoulders that had carried the burdens of empire with remarkable grace. He had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, defeated his enemies, and transformed the Roman world. Yet he had also unleashed forces that would destroy the republic he had claimed to serve. The gentle light that filtered through the windows of Caesar's final morning illuminated a man who had reached heights no Roman before him had achieved, yet who remained fundamentally human in his desires, fears, and limitations. In his study, surrounded by maps of planned campaigns and letters from distant provinces, Caesar embodied both the grandeur and the tragedy of unlimited ambition in a world where mortality ultimately claims all victories. Rest now, gentle listener, in the understanding that even the mightiest among us remain subject to the universal laws that govern all human existence. Okay? And that true greatness lies not in the power we wield, but in the wisdom with which we use it and the legacy of good we leave for those who follow in our footsteps. In the gentle twilight that follows all great stories, we find ourselves standing once more in the Forum Romanum, where the echoes of Caesar's footsteps seem to linger still among the ancient stones. The man who began his journey as a child in the Suburra had become something far greater than any single life could contain. A symbol, a legend, an eternal presence in the human imagination. The Rome that survived Caesar's death was forever changed by his passage through its history. The republic he had claimed to serve was transformed beyond recognition, placed by the empire that would carry Roman law, language, and culture to the farthest corners of the known world. His adopted heir, Octavian, would complete the transformation that Caesar had begun, ruling as Augustus over a Mediterranean world unified under Roman peace. Yet perhaps Caesar's greatest legacy lay not in the territories conquered or the governments transformed, but in the demonstration that individual excellence, when combined with determination and wisdom, could reshape the destiny of nations. His life became a template for leadership that would inspire and instruct countless generations of rulers, generals, and statesmen who followed in his wake. The calendar that bears his name continues to measure our days, a daily reminder of the Roman genius for practical innovation that Caesar embodied. His literary works survive as models of clear, elegant prose that communicates complex ideas with deceptive simplicity. Most profoundly, his story continues to resonate because it captures eternal themes of human ambition, political conflict, and the price of greatness that remain as relevant today as they were to millennia ago. In the soft evening air of our imagination, we can still see Caesar walking through his beloved Rome, pausing perhaps at the temple of Jupiter, where he once served as high priest, or standing in the Curia, where senatorial debates shaped the destiny of the ancient world. The young man who wept before Alexander's statue had surpassed even his hero's achievements, yet remained fundamentally human in his capacity for love, loss, and the complex emotions that mark all mortal existence. As we close this gentle journey through Caesar's remarkable life, we carry with us the understanding that greatness comes in many forms, in courage facing impossible odds, in mercy toward defeated enemies, in the patient accumulation of wisdom through years of study and experience. Caesar's story reminds us that even in our own ordinary lives, we possess the potential for extraordinary achievements when we combine natural gifts with dedicated effort and moral purpose. The stars that shine above Rome tonight are the same stars that witnessed Caesar's birth, his triumphs, and his tragic end. In their eternal dance, we find comfort in the knowledge that while individual lives may end, the influence of noble actions and generous hearts continues to shape the world long after their creators have departed. Caesar achieved the immortality that all humans seek, not through avoiding death, but through living so fully and well that his memory becomes a permanent part of human consciousness. And so we bid farewell to Gaius Julius Caesar, the boy who dreamed of glory, the man who conquered nations, the leader who transformed civilization, and the eternal symbol of human potential. In the gentle silence that follows all great tales, we find peace in the knowledge that some stories never truly end, but become part of the ongoing human story that each of us continues to write through our own choices and actions. Rest well, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding our place in the great continuum of human experience, where each life however humble, contributes to the eternal story of what it means to be human.